What happens when a mortal man becomes the unwilling vessel for a dead king's final curse? When the divine power that was meant to be harvested by a monarch chooses instead to hide inside the most insignificant creature it could find. This is the story of Ren, a gravekeeper who never asked for divinity, and the cosmic chain reaction his mere existence would trigger. A chain reaction that would force kings to take notice, monarchs to act, and the very laws of power to be rewritten. This is the story of how one man stole the impossible, and in doing so, became the one thing the divine realm could never account for. Shall we begin? There exists a law in this world that everyone understands, from the lowest beggar in the slums to the highest S-rank hunter in their ivory towers. Power flows downward. It always has and it always will. The monarchs sit at the apex of existence, their divine authority absolute and unchallenged. Below them, the apostles and their chosen servants. Below them, the S-rank hunters who shape the fate of nations. And far, far below, where the light of these kings never reaches, there are the forgotten ones, the ones who tend graves no one visits, who whisper prayers to deities no one remembers. This is where we find our protagonist, on the outermost edge of civilization, in a region so lawless and neglected that even the monarchs cannot be bothered to claim it. Here, among the windswept hills and crumbling stone, a young man named Ren performs his daily ritual. He sweeps dust from an altar that hasn't seen a worshipper in centuries. He straightens a statue whose features have been weathered to almost nothing by time and neglect. He places offerings of wildflowers before a king whose name has been erased from every history book, every temple record, every living memory. Ren does not do this out of faith. He does it because it is the only job he could find, and because someone must. The gravekeeper before him did it, and the one before that, stretching back into an unbroken chain of anonymity that spans millennia. Ren is not the first forgotten soul to serve a forgotten king, and he knows, with the dull certainty of the truly resigned, that he will not be the last. His days pass in a blur of sameness. Sunrise, sweeping. Midday, offering. Sunset, a quiet meal eaten alone while the wind whispers through the broken pillars. He speaks to no one because there is no one to speak to. The nearest settlement is a 3-day walk through monster-infested wasteland, and Ren has long since accepted that his life will be measured not in adventures or achievements, but in the simple, repetitive acts of maintenance that keep the past from being completely swallowed by the earth. But fate, as it so often does in stories like these, has other plans. And those plans arrive on a night when the moon hangs swollen and yellow over the hills, casting long shadows that seem to reach for the altar like grasping hands. Ren hears the footsteps long before he sees the figure. They are uneven, stumbling, punctuated by gasps, and the wet, rattling sound of a chest struggling to draw breath. Ren reaches for the only weapon he owned, a simple iron shovel worn smooth by years of use, and waits in the shadow of the statue. The figure that emerges from the darkness is a man, though barely. His robes are torn and stained with something that glistens black in the moonlight. His face is a mask of fanatical devotion mixed with mortal terror, his eyes wide and unseeing, focused on something far beyond the physical world. He carries a wound in his side, deep and terrible, and even as Ren watches, the man stumbles and falls to his knees before the altar. He does not seem to notice Ren at all. His attention is fixed entirely on the weathered statue, on the blank stone face that has not acknowledged a prayer in 1,000 years. "Forgive me," the man rasps, his voice a shattered whisper. "Forgive my failure. I tried to warn them. I tried to tell them, but they would not listen. They called me mad. They called me heretic. But I saw what is coming." Ren should leave him. He should let the man die in peace and return to his hut and pretend this never happened. That is what the old Ren would have done. But something in the man's words, in the desperate conviction behind them, holds him in place. "What did you see?" Ren asked, and his own voice sounds strange to him, rough from disuse. The man's head snaps toward him, and for the first time his eyes focus on something tangible. He studies Ren's face, his simple clothes, the shovel in his hand, and then his gaze travels upward to the statue behind him. What he sees there makes his breath catch in his throat. "You," the man breathes. "You tend this place. You keep the flame that no one else remembers." "It's just a job," Ren says quietly, "nothing more." But the man is already shaking his head, a desperate, manic energy seizing his dying body. "No, no, you don't understand. This place, this altar, this king. It is the only thing that matters now. When they come, when they descend to claim what was never theirs to take, this is where they will look. This is the last well that has not gone dry. Ren feels a cold finger trace its way down his spine. Who will come? The man's hand shoots out and grips Ren's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes burn with feverish intensity. The monarchs, all of them. The convergence approaches, the celestial alignment that will allow them to step down from their thrones and walk among us once more. They come to harvest, boy. They come to drink the last remaining dregs of divine essence that still cling to this world. And when they find this place, when they find what sleeps beneath this altar, he trails off, his body racked by a coughing fit that leaves fresh blood on his lips. Ren helps him lie back against the base of the statue, his mind reeling. Monarchs, convergence, divine essence. These are words from legends, from the kind of stories told around campfires to frighten children. They are not real. They cannot be real. But the man's wound is real. His terror is real. And the way he looks at the statue, with a mixture of awe and desperate hope, is the most real thing of all. Listen to me, the man gasps, pulling Ren close. I have seen the prophecy. In the ruins of the first temple before the hunters drove me out, I read the words carved into the living stone by hands that have turned to dust 1,000,000 years ago. The thief will sit on an empty throne. The vessel will contain what the kings cannot. Remember those words. When the sky bleeds and the ground shakes and everything you know crumbles to ash, remember. I don't understand, Ren says, and his voice breaks on the words. What thief? What vessel? I'm just a gravekeeper. I'm nobody. But the man is no longer listening. His eyes have gone glassy, fixed on some point in the distance that only the dying can see. A final breath escapes his lips, a whisper that might have been a prayer or might have been a name, and then he is still. Ren sits there for a long time, the dead man's hand still gripping his wrist. The wind has died, and the night has gone silent, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Eventually, gently, he frees himself from the corpse's grasp and covers the man's face with a corner of his torn robe. He should bury him. That is what gravekeepers do. But something holds him back, some instinct that whispers that this man's death was not an ending but a beginning, a prologue to something vast and terrible that is even now bearing down on this forgotten hill. Ren returns to his hut, but he does not sleep. He sits by the single window, watching the statue in the moonlight, and he thinks about the man's words. The thief will sit on an empty throne. What throne? What theft? And why, of all the places in the world, did this dying fanatic crawl to this specific altar to speak his final words? Hours pass. The moon begins its slow descent toward the horizon, and then in the deepest hour of the night, when the boundary between worlds grows thin and strange things walk the earth, Ren feels it. It is not a sound. It is not a sight. It is a pulse, deep in the bones, a vibration that seems to originate not from the world around him but from somewhere far beneath. It comes from the statue, from the ground beneath the statue, from the sleeping earth itself. Ren stumbles outside, his heart hammering against his ribs. The statue glows, faintly, so faintly he might be imagining it. A soft luminescence pulses from the weathered stone, a heartbeat rhythm that matches something deep in his own chest. And then he hears it. A whisper, not in his ears but directly in his mind, a voice ancient and vast and achingly tired. Forgotten but not gone. Ren falls to his knees, his hands pressing against the cold earth. The pulse fades. The glow dims. The night returns to normal, but something has changed. Something fundamental has shifted in the fabric of his reality. He is still kneeling there when the first light of dawn touches the horizon, and in that light he sees what he did not see in the darkness. The dead man's body is gone, not buried, not moved, but simply absent. In its place, pressed into the earth before the altar, is a single word written in no language Ren has ever seen, but somehow, impossibly, he understands it. Wait. And so he waits. For 3 days he waits. He tends the grave of the unknown man who is no longer there. He places offerings before the statue that spoke to him in the night. He watches the sky for signs of the convergence the dying man promised. On the 3rd day, the sky begins to bleed. It starts as a subtle shift, the blue deepening to purple, then to red, then to a crimson so deep and terrible that it seems to stain the very air. Across the continent, people look up and feel their blood run cold. The hunters sense it first. a pressure in their cores that speaks of power beyond mortal comprehension. The S-ranks gather in their towers, their faces pale, their hands shaking. The kings and queens of nations order their armies to ready themselves for a threat they cannot name. And in the far north, in the seat of his power, the monarch of scorched earth opens his eyes. He is called many things by those who fear him: the Ashen Lord, the burning throne, the one who reduces kingdoms to cinders. His domain is destruction, pure and absolute, and for 10,000 years he has waited for this moment. The convergence, the thinning of the veil, the opportunity to step down from his divine realm and walk among mortals once more, not as a distant observer but as a harvester. He rises from his throne of fused obsidian and bone, and the very fabric of his realm trembles. His apostles feel his intention and fall to their knees, their faces pressed to the ground. His armies of ash and ember stir in their slumber, ready to follow their Lord into any world, against any foe. The time has come, the monarch speaks, and his voice is the sound of forests burning, of cities falling, of hope dying in the hearts of men. The old kings are dead, their essence waits to be claimed, and I will drink deepest. He descends. The sky does not just bleed, it tears. A wound opens in the firmament above the capital of the most powerful kingdom on the continent, a gash of impossible darkness ringed with fire. From this wound the monarch descends, and his presence alone is enough to shatter reality. Mountains crack, rivers boil, the air itself ignites, not with flame but with sheer oppressive power that makes breathing an act of desperate will. The S-rank hunters of the capital, 50 of the strongest warriors in human history, rise to meet him. They have no choice. It is their duty, their purpose. They last exactly 17 seconds. The monarch does not even acknowledge them. He simply exists in their direction, and they cease to be, not killed, not destroyed, simply erased from existence as if they had never been born, never trained, never hoped to protect their people. The armies of the kingdom fare no better. 10,000 soldiers, equipped with enchanted weapons and supported by mages of incredible power, march against the divine invader. The monarch raises one hand, and the earth opens beneath them. Lava, drawn from the planet's core by his mere will, consumes them whole. But he is not here to conquer. He is here to harvest. The monarch's senses spread outward, vast and terrible, seeking the one thing he crossed the boundaries of reality to find: primordial essence. The lingering divine power of the kings who came before, the ones his kind supplanted 10,000 years ago. The old kings are dead, but their power did not die with them. It scattered, hiding in ley lines and sacred groves and forgotten altars, waiting to be claimed. And there, at the edge of his perception, he feels it. A pulse. Weak, dormant, but unmistakably primordial. It calls to him like a beacon, and he turns his burning gaze toward the lawless outer rings, toward the forgotten hills where no monarch has bothered to look for millennia. Ren feels it before he sees it. The pressure builds in his chest, in his skull, in every cell of his body. It is the weight of a king's attention, and it threatens to crush him into paste. He falls to his knees before the altar, his hands gripping the weathered stone as if it can anchor him to reality. The statue pulses in response, a desperate thrum of energy that Ren can feel in his very soul. It is afraid. The old king, whatever remains of it, knows what is coming, knows that this is the end. The sky above the hill tears open, and the monarch descends. He is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. His form is humanoid, but only barely, a silhouette of living flame and shadow that seems to shift and change with every heartbeat. His eyes are twin suns, and when they fix on Ren, the gravekeeper feels his sense of self begin to dissolve under their weight. You, the monarch speaks, and his voice is the end of all things. You are nothing, less than nothing, but you stand on ground that holds what I seek. Move, and I will permit you to continue your insignificant existence. Ren cannot move, cannot speak, cannot even breathe. The pressure of the monarch's presence is absolute, and he understands with terrible clarity why the S-rank hunters fell so quickly. This is not a fight. This is not even a massacre. This is simply the natural order. Kings are kings, and mortals are mortals, and never the twain shall meet as equals. The monarch ignores him, turning his attention to the altar, to the statue, to the sleeping power beneath. He raises his hands, and the ritual begins. Divine energy pours from the monarch in waves, forming intricate patterns in the air, chains of pure light that sink into the earth and wrap around something vast and sleeping. Ren feels it, the old king stirring in its slumber, confused and terrified. The chains tighten and the essence begins to rise, drawn upward by the monarch's will. But something is wrong. The essence rises, yes, but it does not flow into the monarch as it should. It hovers in the air, a sphere of pure white light, and it resists. The monarch's eyes narrow, and he pours more power into the ritual, his chains tightening, his will pressing down with the weight of 10,000 years of absolute authority. And the old king, the forgotten king, the deity who has slept beneath this hill since before human civilization existed, finally wakes. Not gently, not peacefully. It wakes in terror, in desperate survival instinct, and it lashes out. The chains shatter. The ritual collapses. The monarch stumbles back, shock and fury warring on his divine features. The sphere of light hovers for one eternal moment, and then it moves. Not toward the monarch, not back into the earth, but toward the only other living thing in the vicinity, toward Ren. He has no time to react, no time to run, no time even to close his eyes. The light enters him, fills him, consumes him. He feels his mortal body stretch and strain under the weight of divinity, feels his consciousness expand to contain something vast and ancient and terribly afraid. And then darkness. The monarch stands alone on the hill, staring at the spot where the insignificant gravekeeper once knelt. The power is gone, hidden, fused with a mortal vessel in a desperate act of survival that should have been impossible. He could kill the boy, tear him apart and reclaim the essence by force. But the effort of the failed ritual, combined with the strain of the convergence, has weakened him, and in the distance he feels other monarchs descending, other divine presences claiming their own harvests. He cannot appear weak, cannot let them see that he failed. The thief, the monarch whispers, and the word carries weight, becomes truth, becomes prophecy. Let him run, let him hide. My apostles will find him. My will is not so easily denied. He ascends, tearing back through the wound in reality, leaving behind a crater where the altar once stood, and a world that will never be the same. Ren wakes to ashes. He lies in the center of a vast crater, his body somehow intact, his mind changed. He can feel it. The presence inside him, vast and sleeping, curled around his soul like a cat by a fire. He can feel the monarch, distant but connected, a burning star at the edge of his perception. And he can feel power, divine power, stolen power. It flows through his veins like liquid fire, waiting to be shaped, waiting to be used. He raises a trembling hand and concentrates, and the air before him shimmers, a field of absolute negation that erases a falling leaf from existence. Absolute nullification, the ability to say no to reality itself. Ren stares at his hands, at the crater, at the empty space where his simple life used to be. The prophecy echoes in his mind. The thief will sit on an empty throne. He is the thief, and somewhere out there, a monarch who will never stop hunting him is already calling for his head. The game has begun. And Ren, the forgotten gravekeeper, has just become its most important piece. Ren's first instinct is to run. It is the instinct of a lifetime, the reflexive response of a man who has spent his entire existence learning that the best way to survive is to remain unseen, unheard, unnoticed. But as he stumbles to his feet and tries to take a step, his body betrays him. The divine essence inside him shifts, and the world tilts sideways. He falls to his knees in the ash, retching, though there is nothing in his stomach to expel. The presence within him is not hostile. He understands that much through the haze of pain and confusion. It is simply vast, and it does not know how to fit inside something as small as a mortal frame. It keeps pressing against the boundaries of his soul, testing, exploring, and every time it moves, Ren's nervous system lights up like a struck nerve. He crawls to the edge of the crater and pulls himself over the lip. The hill is gone. The altar is gone. His hut, his simple home of 3 years, is nothing but scattered splinters half buried in ash. The statue of the forgotten king, the weathered stone face that watched over him through countless lonely nights, has been utterly vaporized. But Ren is alive, and somewhere deep inside, the presence that saved him stirs in what might almost be called satisfaction. "You live," a voice whispers in his mind, and Ren freezes. It is the same voice he heard in the night, ancient and tired and achingly vast, Good. I had hoped, but hope is a luxury for the living. I had forgotten that. Who are you? Ren whispers, his voice cracking. What did you do to me? I am what remains, a spark, a memory, a king who refused to die. The voice pauses and Ren feels something like amusement ripple through his consciousness. And what I did was survive, through you. I apologize for the lack of consent, but the Burning One left me no choice. The Burning One, the monarch of scorched earth. Ren's mind flashes to those twin sun eyes, that voice like the end of the world, and he shudders. He'll come back, Ren says. He'll find me, Yes, he will try. The voice is calm, almost serene, but he cannot descend again. The convergence was a single opportunity and he used it poorly. His pride will not allow him to admit failure openly, so he will send his servants, apostles, hunters, those who worship at his burning throne. They will come and they will hunt you, and they will not stop until you are dead and I am consumed. Ren wants to scream. He wants to cry. He wants to go back to yesterday, when his biggest concern was whether the wild flowers he placed on the altar would wilt before sunset. But yesterday is gone, erased by forces beyond his comprehension, and he is left standing in the ashes of his old life with a king sleeping inside his soul. What do I do? He asks, and the question is not directed at the voice. It is directed at the universe, at fate, at anything that might hear and offer guidance. The voice answers anyway. Survive, hide, learn. The power I have given you, this nullification, it is the first key, but there are others. You must find them before the Burning One's servants find you. You must become worthy of the gift you did not ask for. How? Ren's voice breaks on the word. How do I become worthy of divinity? I'm nobody, I'm a gravekeeper. I can't fight, I can't. You can learn. The voice cuts him off, firm but not unkind. You can grow. Or you can lie down in this ash and wait for the apostles to find you. The choice is yours, but know this, Ren, gravekeeper of a forgotten king. I did not choose you because you were strong. I chose you because you were kind. You tended my resting place when no one remembered my name. You placed flowers before my statue when there was no one to see. That kindness, that simple, unthinking devotion, it is rarer than you know, and it is the soil in which true power grows. Ren is silent for a long moment. The wind blows across the crater, stirring the ash into tiny cyclones that dance and disperse. In the distance, the sun is rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, indifferent to the cosmic drama that unfolded. He thinks about the dead cultist, crawling across the wasteland to deliver his prophecy. He thinks about the monarch, the terror and majesty of his presence. He thinks about the power flowing through his veins, waiting to be shaped, waiting to be used. And slowly, painfully, he makes his choice. Where do I go? He asks. North, the voice answers. There is a city built around a dungeon. The hunters there are strong, and their presence will mask my essence from the Burning One's trackers. You will find allies there, or you will find death, but you will not find either standing in this crater. Ren nods. He takes one last look at the place that was his home for 3 years, then turns his back on it and begins to walk. The journey takes 5 days. 5 days of sleeping in caves and under rock overhang. 5 days of eating roots and berries, and once, a rabbit he manages to kill with a well-thrown stone. 5 days of feeling the presence inside him grow quieter, more settled, as if it is learning to fit into the contours of his soul. And 5 days of feeling the hunters behind him. He cannot see them, but he knows they are there. The voice warns him when they get close, and he changes direction, circles back, uses streams and rocky ground to hide his trail. They are persistent, these servants of the Burning One. They do not tire, do not rest, do not give up. On the evening of the 5th day, Ren crests a hill and sees his destination for the first time. The dungeon city spreads across the valley below like a wound that refuses to heal. It is vast and ugly and alive, a sprawling metropolis of stone and steel built around the gaping maw of a dungeon entrance that pierces the earth like a dagger thrust from below. Walls surround it, thick and high and lined with guards. Smoke rises from 1,000 chimneys, and even from this distance, Ren can hear the faint, constant hum of activity. The Crucible, the voice whispered, that is what they call it. A place where hunters come to prove themselves, to grow strong, to die. You will find no kindness here, Ren, but you may find opportunity. Ren descends toward the city. As he walks, he passes others on the road, Hunters mostly, their bodies hardened by years of combat, their eyes sharp and calculating. They glance at him, dismiss him, move on. He is nothing to them. A peasant in worn clothes, too thin and too tired to be worth their attention. It is exactly what he needs. He enters the city through the eastern gate, joining a stream of merchants and laborers and adventurers. The guards barely glance at his papers, which are old and faded and technically not his. The cultist had carried them, and Ren had taken them from the body before it vanished. Another gift from a dead man. The city swallows him whole. The streets are crowded and loud and overwhelming. Ren has never seen so many people in one place, has never heard so many voices, smelled so many smells, felt so many presences pressing against his awareness. He keeps his head down, his shoulders hunched, his eyes on the ground. Let them see nothing. Let them remember nothing. There is an inn, the voice guides him. In the lower district, the keeper asks no questions and remembers no faces. Go there, rest. We have much to discuss. Ren follows the directions, weaving through alleys and side streets until he finds it. The Sleeping Fox. A sagging building wedged between a tannery and a weaponsmith, its sign hanging crooked, its windows grimy. He pushes through the door and steps inside. The common room is dim and smoky and nearly empty. A few hard-eyed men nurse drinks in the corners. A woman with tired eyes wipes a glass behind the bar. She looks up as Ren enters, studies him for a long moment, then shrugs. Rooms 2 copper a night, foods extra, pay in advance. Ren nods and places the last of the coins he found on the cultist's body on the bar. The woman scoops them up without counting and tosses him a key. Room 3, up the stairs, end of the hall. Don't cause trouble. Ren takes the key and climbs the stairs. The room is small and bare, just a bed and a wash basin and a window that looks out over a narrow alley. It is perfect. He locks the door, sits on the edge of the bed, and finally, for the first time in 5 days, allows himself to breathe. You did well, the voice says. You survived, you reached shelter. Now the real work begins. What work? Ren asks. What am I supposed to do here? Grow stronger, learn to use what I have given you, and find answers. There are others in this city, others who remember the old kings, others who have reason to hate the monarchs. You must find them before the Burning One's servants find you. Ren wants to ask more, but exhaustion crashes over him like a wave. His eyes close, his body sinks into the thin mattress. And for the first time since the monarch descended, he sleeps without dream. In the morning, he wakes to the sound of shouting in the streets. He goes to the window and looks down. A procession is passing through the lower district, a line of figures in crimson robes, their faces hidden behind golden masks. They carry banners emblazoned with a symbol that makes Ren's blood run cold. A burning sun, the mark of the Monarch of Scorched Earth. The apostles are here, and they are already hunting. Ren steps back from the window, his heart hammering. They cannot sense you through the city's chaos, the voice assures him. Too many hunters, too much residual energy from the dungeon. You are safe for now, but they will not leave. They will search until they find you or until they are called back. How long do I have? Days, perhaps weeks. It depends on how thorough they are and how many other distractions arise. The dungeon is active and the city's hunters are restless. There may be opportunity. Ren dresses in the clothes he stole from a washing line the previous night, simple hunter's garb that helps him blend in. He leaves the inn and walks the streets, learning the city's rhythms, its dangers, its hidden corners. He watches the apostles from a distance, noting their patrol routes, their methods, their number. And in the evening, he finds the grave pit. It is an underground fighting ring, a place where desperate men and women gamble their lives for coin and glory. The crowd is loud and bloodthirsty. The fighters are brutal and skilled. And the prizes are enough to live on for weeks. Ren watches a match, studying the combatants, their techniques, their weaknesses. A plan forms in his mind. A dangerous plan, but a necessary one. He needs money. He needs practice. He needs to learn what his stolen power can do. You cannot use nullification openly, the voice warns. If the apostles see it, they will know. They will come. I won't use it openly, Ren murmurs. I'll use it subtly, just enough to tip the balance, just enough to survive. He signs up for the next match. His opponent is a giant of a man, scarred and brutal, wielding a massive axe that could cleave Ren in two. The crowd roars as they enter the pit. The announcer calls out their names, their records, their odds. Ren is 100-to-1 underdog. The bell rings, the giant charges. Ren does not try to block or dodge, he simply nudges. A fraction of his power extends, invisible, undetectable. It wraps around the giant's axe and negates a tiny portion of its weight, just enough to throw off the man's swing. The axe whistles past Ren's ear, missing by inches. The giant stumbles off balance. Ren steps inside his guard and delivers a simple punch to the kidney, not powerful but precise. The giant grunts and recovers, swinging again. Again Ren nudges, and again the attack goes wide. The crowd begins to murmur. This skinny nobody is still standing, still fighting, still surviving. Round 2. The giant is angry now, swinging wildly. Ren's nudges become more frequent, more precise. He negates the friction on the pit floor, making the giant slip. He negates the air resistance on his own punches, making them faster. He negates the giant's perception of time, just for an instant, creating openings that should not exist. By round 3, the giant is exhausted and confused. Ren lands a final blow to the temple and the man crashes to the ground. The crowd erupts. Ren raises his hands, accepting the cheers, and in that moment he feels something he has never felt before. Power, real power. Not stolen, not borrowed, but earned. He collects his winnings and slips out of the pit before anyone can ask questions. But as he walks through the crowded streets, he feels eyes on him. Not the apostles, someone else. Someone who saw through his act. The grizzled hunter is waiting outside the inn. He is old but not weak. His body carries the scars of 1,000 battles, and his eyes hold the weight of decades of violence. He leans against the wall, arms crossed, watching Ren approach with an expression that might be curiosity or might be suspicion. "You fought well tonight," the hunter says. His voice is rough like stones grinding together. "Lucky too, very lucky." Ren keeps walking. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." The hunter falls into step beside him. "Let me ask you something, boy. How does a scrawny gravekeeper from the outer rings survive 3 rounds against a veteran pit fighter? How does he dodge swings that should take his head off? How does he make a man who's killed 50 opponents look like a drunk stumbling through his first fight?" Ren stops walking. His heart hammers but his face remains still. "I told you, I don't know what. I saw a monarch once." The hunter's voice drops, becoming something almost gentle. 30 years ago, he descended on my kingdom and I watched him erase an army with a thought. I felt his presence, boy. I felt what divine power feels like when it's aimed at you. And I felt something like that tonight. In the pit, coming from you. Ren stares at him, frozen. "I don't know what you are," the hunter continues. "I don't know how you came by that power, but I know what the apostles are hunting for. I know the rewards they're offering, and I know that if you keep fighting like you did tonight, they'll find you before the week is out." He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small token, pressing it into Ren's hand. "There's a canyon 3 miles east of the city. I'll be there at dawn. If you want to learn how to control what's inside you before it gets you killed, come find me. If not, well, it's been nice knowing you, gravekeeper." He turns and walks away, disappearing into the crowds. Ren stands alone in the street, the token warm in his palm, the weight of the hunter's words pressing down on him. He knows, the voice whispers, "But he has not betrayed you, not yet. Can I trust him?" A long pause. "I do not know, but I know that you cannot do this alone, and he is the first person in 30 years who has looked at me and not tried to kill what he saw." Ren closes his fist around the token. Tomorrow, at dawn, he will make his choice. But tonight, he returns to his room and prepares for whatever comes next. The hunt is on. The pieces are moving, and somewhere in the darkness, the apostles of the Burning One draw closer with every passing hour. Dawn breaks gray and cold over the crucible. Ren slips out of the city before the gates fully open, joining a stream of laborers heading to the outer field. He keeps his head down, his movements casual, but his senses are stretched to their limit, reaching for any sign of the crimson robes. The streets are quiet. The apostles are not mourning people, it seems. A small mercy. The canyon lies 3 miles east, just as the hunter promised. It is a wound in the earth, deep and narrow, its walls striated with colors that speak of ages long past. A stream runs through its heart, and the sound of water echoes off the stone, creating a constant, peaceful murmur that feels almost like a mockery given what Ren has come here to do. The hunter is waiting on a flat rock by the water. He sits cross-legged, eyes closed, his breathing slow and measured. He does not open his eyes when Ren approaches, does not acknowledge his presence at all until Ren stops a few feet away and clears his throat. "You came." The hunter's voice is flat, unsurprised. "Good. Means you're either brave or stupid. In my experience, the ones who survive are usually a bit of both. My name is Ren." "I know." The hunter opens his eyes, and they are old eyes, tired eyes, but sharp as blades. "I'm Kale. Used to be someone important a long time ago. Now I'm just an old man who drinks too much and remembers too much. Sit down. We have work to do." Ren hesitates, then sits on the rock across from Kale. The presence inside him stirs, curious, cautious. It remembers this man's words from the night before. "He looked at me and did not try to kill what he saw." "You felt it," Ren says quietly. "In the pit, you felt him." "Him?" Kale's lips quirk. "You talk about it like it's a person, like it's separate from you. That's interesting. Most vessels I've heard about, the fusion is complete. The king consumes the mortal or the mortal consumes the king. But you two, you're still figuring each other out. You know about vessels." Kale laughs, a dry, rasping sound. "Boy, I know about a lot of things. I was a royal knight before the Burning One took my kingdom. I served a king who worshipped an old king, one of the ones who went to sleep when the monarchs rose. I watched that king die, watched his essence scatter to the wind, and I've spent the 30 years since then learning everything I can about the creatures who murdered my world." He leans forward, his eyes boring into Ren. "So yes, I know about vessels, I know about the monarchs, I know about the convergence. And I know that you, a gravekeeper from nowhere, are now carrying the last spark of a deity who should have died 10,000 years ago, which means you are either the most fortunate man alive or the most cursed, probably both." Ren swallows. "Can you help me control it, hide it?" "I can try." Kale stands, stretching his aged frame. "But first I need to see what we're dealing with. That power you used in the pit, that nullification. Show it to me. Full strength. Don't hold back." Ren hesitates. The voice whispers caution, but he pushes it aside. He came here for help. He needs to trust someone, or he will die alone in a gutter while the apostles close in. He raises his hand and reaches for the power inside him. It responds instantly, eagerly, as if it has been waiting for permission. The air before his palm shimmers, and a field of absolute negation expands outward, erasing the morning light, the sound of the stream, the very concept of existence in that space. Rocks within the field crumble to dust. The water touching its edge vanishes into nothing. And Ren feels, glorious, powerful, limitless. Then the field collapses and he falls to his knees, gasping. The power recedes, curling back into the depths of his soul, and he is left shaking and weak and terribly, terribly human. Kale watches him with an expression that might be awe or might be fear. "Interesting," he says finally. "Very interesting. That's not just nullification. That's negation of existence itself. Do you understand what that means?" Ren shakes his head, still struggling to breathe. "It means you're not canceling skills or spells. You're telling reality that something never existed in the first place. That's king-level power, boy. That's the kind of authority that monarchs fight wars over, and you're using it to make pit fighters miss their swings." "I didn't know," Ren whispers. "I didn't understand." "Of course you didn't." Kale sighs and sits back down. "The king inside you, it's been asleep for 10,000 years. It doesn't know how to teach you any more than you know how to learn. You're both stumbling in the dark, and that's going to get you killed." He is silent for a long moment, staring at the stream, at the water flowing endlessly past. Then he speaks again, his voice softer. "Nullification isn't just a shield, Ren. It's an assertion. When you use it, you're telling the universe that your will matters more than its laws. You're saying, no, this does not happen. No, this does not exist. No, your power means nothing here. That's not defense. That's dominance." Ren looks at his hands, the same hands that once placed wildflowers on a forgotten altar. "I don't feel dominant. I feel terrified." "Good," Kale nods approvingly. "Fear keeps you alive. Confidence gets you killed. Remember that." He stands again, this time with purpose. "Now let's begin. First lesson, control. You need to be able to use that power without exhausting yourself, without revealing yourself, and without accidentally erasing something you didn't mean to erase. We start small, very small. The training is brutal. Kale does not believe in gentle instruction. He believes in trial by fire, in learning through pain, in pushing Ren to his absolute limit, and then pushing harder. For hours, they work in the canyon, Ren practicing the most delicate applications of his power while Kale watches and critiques, and occasionally throws rocks at his head to test his concentration. Negate the weight of a single pebble. Negate the friction on a single leaf. Negate the sound of your own heartbeat. Negate the warmth of the sun on your skin. Each exercise requires microscopic precision, a hair's breadth of power applied exactly where needed and nowhere else. Ren fails, constantly. He negates too much or too little or in the wrong place. He exhausts himself and has to rest. He gets frustrated and lashes out, accidentally erasing a boulder the size of a house, and Kale makes him spend an hour apologizing to the canyon spirits, which Ren is fairly sure do not exist, but apologizes to anyway because Kale's glare is terrifying. But slowly, painfully, he begins to improve. He is good, the voice observes on the third day. This human, he understands power in a way that most do not. His methods are crude, but his insights are valuable. Ren, too tired to respond verbally, simply nods. He is lying flat on his back, staring at the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. Every muscle in his body aches. His head throbs with the effort of maintaining constant control. But for the first time since the monarch descended, he feels like he might actually survive. On the evening of the fifth day, Kale calls a halt to the training. His face is grave, his eyes distant. "We have a problem," he says. "The apostles are getting closer. They've offered a reward for information on anyone exhibiting anomalous energy patterns. Half the city is looking for you now, and the other half is watching to see who gets caught." Ren sits up slowly, dread pooling in his stomach. How long? A few days, maybe, a week at most. They're methodical. They'll search every district, question every informant, turn over every stone until they find you. Kale meets his eyes. You have two choices: run and hope you can stay ahead of them, or fight and hope you're strong enough to survive. Fight? Ren laughs bitterly. Kale, I can barely negate a pebble without passing out. I'm not ready to fight apostles. No, you're not. Kale's voice is hard. But you might not have a choice. The Burning One's servants don't give up. They don't show mercy. They don't accept surrender. If they find you, they will kill you. So you need to decide right now what you're willing to do to survive. Ren is silent for a long moment. The voice inside him stirs, curious, waiting. It has no answers either. It is as lost as he is. I don't want to die, Ren says finally, but I don't want to become a killer either. That cultist, the one who died at my altar, he said something about a prophecy. The thief will sit on an empty throne. What does that mean? Kale's eyes narrow. A prophecy from where? The first temple. He said he read it there before the hunters drove him out. For the first time since Ren met him, Kale looks genuinely shaken. His weathered face pales, and his hands clench into fists. The first temple, he repeats. You're sure? Yes, why, what is it? Kale is quiet for a long moment. Then he stands and begins packing, his movements agitated, his mind clearly racing. The first temple is a legend, he says finally. A place that supposedly exists outside of reality, outside of time. They say it was built by the first humans before the monarchs rose, before the old kings fell. They say it contains knowledge that no living being possesses. Knowledge about the true nature of the monarchs. Knowledge about how they might be. Challenge. He stops packing and stares at Ren. If there's a prophecy from the first temple, and if that prophecy named you, then this is bigger than I thought. Bigger than both of us. You're not just a random vessel, Ren. You're part of something. Something that's been waiting a long time for you to appear. Ren doesn't know what to say. The weight of it all presses down on him, suffocating. He is a gravekeeper. He is nobody. He cannot be part of an ancient prophecy. He cannot be the thief who sits on an empty throne. But the voice inside him whispers something different. The prophecy, I remember, vaguely, like a dream half forgotten. There was a time before the long sleep when we old kings spoke of a champion, one who would rise when we fell, one who would carry our last spark into a new age. I thought it was myth. I thought it was hope, nothing more. But if the first temple confirms it, You remember, Ren asks aloud, forgetting that Kale cannot hear the voice. Kale raises an eyebrow. Remember what? The prophecy. The old king inside me, he says he remembers something. Vaguely, like a dream. Kale's eyes widen. He speaks to you directly. Yes, all the time. Is that not normal? Nothing about your situation is normal, boy. Kale shakes his head in wonder. Most vessels, the fusion destroys the mortal personality, or the king's consciousness fades entirely. But you too, you're coexisting, communicating, that's unprecedented. He falls silent, thinking. Then he makes a decision. We need to find the first temple. If the prophecy is real, if it names you, then there may be answers there. Instructions, tools, weapons, something that can help you survive what's coming. But we don't even know where it is, Ren protests. You said it exists outside reality. How do we find something like that? I don't know. Kale's voice is grim. But I know someone who might. An old contact, a scholar who spent his life studying the old kings and the monarchs. He lives in hiding deep in the mountain. If anyone can help us, it's him. He looks at Ren and there is something new in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or hope. But first, we have to survive the apostle. They're closing in and they won't wait for us to make plans. So here's what we're going to do. The plan is simple, which means it is also terrifying. Ren will return to the crucible and continue his normal routine, acting as if nothing has changed. He will not use his power, not even subtly. He will be invisible, forgettable, nothing. Meanwhile, Kale will spread false information, create distractions, lead the apostles on chases through the city's underworld. It is a temporary solution at best. The apostles are not stupid. They will eventually see through the misdirection and tighten their net. But temporary might be enough. Temporary might buy them the time they need to reach the mountains, to find the scholar, to learn the truth about the prophecy. Ren slips back into the city at dusk, merging with the crowds, becoming just another face in the endless sea of humanity. He returns to the sleeping fox, climbs to his room and sits in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city outside. You are afraid, the voice observes. Yes. Good, fear keeps you alive, but do not let it consume you. You are more than you know, Ren. You are more than a gravekeeper. You are more than a vessel. You are the hope of a dead king and fear of a living monarch. Remember that. Ren closes his eyes and tries to believe it. The next 3 days pass in a blur of waiting and watching. Ren follows Kale's instructions to the letter, staying invisible, staying forgettable. He eats at the same cheap stalls, walks the same streets, returns to the same room at the same time each night. He does not use his power, not even once, and the effort of constant suppression leaves him exhausted and irritable. But it works. The apostles pass him by without a glance. Their patrols grow more frequent, their questions more pointed, but they never look twice at the thin, tired young man who could be anyone and no one. On the 4th day, Kale finds him at the market. He looks older, more worn, but there is a fire in his eyes that Ren has not seen before. I've found something, he says quietly, falling into step beside Ren. A lead on the first temple, the scholar, the one I told you about. He's been researching something big. He wants to meet. When, where? Tonight, outside the city. Same canyon. Kale glances around, ensuring no one is listening. But there's a problem. The apostles are getting suspicious. They've noticed the pattern in the false leads, the misdirection. They know someone's helping you. They're watching me now. Ren's blood runs cold. Then you shouldn't be seen with me. If they follow you, they won't. I'm too old to be caught that easily. Kale smiles, a thin, hard expression. But after tonight, I'm going dark, disappearing for a while. If this meeting goes well, you'll have a new guide. If it goes badly, well, it's been an honor, gravekeeper. He claps Ren on the shoulder and walks away, vanishing into the crowd before Ren can respond. That night, Ren slips out of the city once more and makes his way to the canyon. The moon is full, painting the rocks in silver and shadow. The stream murmurs its endless song, and waiting on the flat rock by the water is a figure Ren does not recognize. She is young, perhaps Ren's age, with sharp features and sharper eyes. Her clothes are those of a hunter, practical and worn, but there is something about her bearing that speaks of more than simple mercenary work. She watches Ren approach with an expression that might be curiosity or might be calculation. You're the gravekeeper, she says. It is not a question. I'm Ren, who are you? My name is Lyra. Kale sent me. He couldn't come himself. The apostles are too close, but he wanted you to have this. She holds out a small leather pouch. Ren takes it, opens it, and finds a carefully folded map and a letter sealed with wax. He breaks the seal and reads by moonlight. Ren, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or in hiding. Don't look for me. The apostles have my scent, and I won't lead them to you. The woman who brings you this is Lyra. She is the scholar's daughter. Her father has information about the first temple, about the prophecy, about what you are. She will take you to him. Trust her as you trusted me. One more thing. The apostles have called for reinforcements. A shard is coming. I don't know if you understand what that means, so I'll explain. A shard is a fragment of a monarch's will, given form and sent to do what apostles cannot. It is not quite a king, but it is more than mortal. If it catches you, you will die. You have perhaps a week before it arrives. Use that time wisely. Kale. Ren folds the letter carefully and tucks it into his shirt. When he looks up, Lyra is watching him with those sharp, assessing eyes. My father is dying, she says flatly. He's held on this long because he believes in the prophecy, because he believes you're coming, but he doesn't have much time. We need to leave. Now. Where is he? In the mountain. 3 days' travel if we push hard. She turns and begins walking, not waiting to see if he follows. The apostles are searching the city, but they haven't spread into the high passes yet. If we move fast, we can slip through before they tighten the net. Ren hesitates for only a moment. Then he follows her into the darkness, leaving behind the only city he has known, the only ally he has found, the fragile safety he has built. The mountains rise before them, vast and indifferent, and somewhere in their depths answers wait, or death, or both. The thief walks toward his empty throne, and behind him, in the city below, something terrible begins to take shape. A shard of the Burning One's will, descending from the divine realm with a single purpose. Find the vessel, reclaim the spark, erase the thief from existence. The hunt is about to become much, much more dangerous. The mountains do not welcome them. Ren learns this within the first hour of climbing, as the gentle slopes below the tree line give way to jagged cliffs and treacherous switchbacks. The air grows thin and cold, and the wind carries a bite that cuts through his stolen hunter's garb like it's made of paper. Lyra moves ahead of him with the ease of long practice, her feet finding holds on the bare rock that Ren cannot even see. Keep up, she calls back, not bothering to hide the irritation in her voice. My father doesn't have days to wait for you to learn how to climb. Ren grits his teeth and keeps moving. His muscles burn, his lungs ache. The presence inside him stirs occasionally, offering wordless encouragement, but it cannot carry him up the mountain. That he must do himself. They climb through the first day and into the night, stopping only when the darkness becomes too complete to continue. Lyra finds a shallow cave, barely more than a recess in the cliff face, and they huddle inside while the wind screams past the entrance. She produces dried meat and hard bread from her pack, sharing without comment, and Ren eats because he knows he needs the strength. Your father, he says eventually, his voice rough from the cold. What's wrong with him? Lyra is silent for so long that Ren thinks she will not answer. Then, quietly, the Burning One's apostles found him 3 years ago. They wanted information about the old kings, about the prophecies. He wouldn't talk, so they persuaded him. Her voice is flat, controlled, but Ren hears the pain beneath it. They broke his body, but not his mind. He escaped, crawled through these mountains for 2 weeks before I found him. He's been dying ever since. Slowly, painfully, but he held on because he believed you would come. Ren does not know what to say. He stares at the cave wall, at the ancient stone that has watched countless travelers pass through this same darkness, and feels the weight of expectation pressing down on him. I'm not a savior, he whispers. I'm just a gravekeeper. I don't know why the prophecy chose me. I don't know why the old king chose me. I'm not special. I'm not strong. I'm just tired. Lyra looks at him, and for the first time her expression softens just slightly. My father used to say that the kings don't choose the strong. They choose the ones who will carry the weight without breaking. Strength can be gained. Character can't. She turns away, settling against the cave wall. Sleep. We have 2 more days of climbing and the weather is getting worse. Ren sleeps and dreams of empty thrones. The second day is harder. The storm Lyra predicted arrives in the afternoon, a howling blizzard that reduces visibility to arm's length and turns the rocks slick with ice. They press on anyway, Lyra driven by desperation, Ren driven by the simple knowledge that stopping means death. The wind tries to tear them from the cliff. The cold tries to freeze them in place. But they climb. In the darkest hour of the second night, they reach the scholar's refuge. It is a structure built into the mountain itself, a series of caves expanded and connected by years of labor. The entrance is hidden behind a frozen waterfall, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Lyra leads Ren through the icy curtain and into a warm, dry space that feels like entering another world. Torches line the walls, their flames steady in the still air. Simple furniture occupies the main chamber, a table, chairs, shelves lined with books and scrolls, and in the corner on a bed of furs lies a man who might once have been strong. He is wasted now, his body reduced to skin and bone, his face a mask of pain that even sleep cannot smooth. But his eyes, when they open at the sound of footsteps, are sharp and aware and filled with a desperate hope. "Lyra," he breathes, his voice a ghost of what it must have been. "You found him, you actually found him." Lyra crosses to her father's side, taking his hand, her face revealing more emotion than Ren has seen in their entire journey. "I found him, father. He's here, the gravekeeper from the prophecy." The scholar's eyes find Ren, and Ren feels himself being studied, assessed, weighed. It is not an unpleasant sensation, exactly, but it is intense, as if the dying man is looking past his flesh and bone and seeing directly into his soul. "You carry him," the scholar whispers. "The forgotten one. I can feel his presence like a warm ember in the darkness. Come closer, boy, let me look at you." Ren approaches, uncertain. The old king inside him stirs, and for a moment, Ren feels something like recognition, like greeting an old friend after millennia apart. "He knows me," the voice says, and there is wonder in it. "This mortal, this dying scholar, he has touched my essence before." "How?" "You felt him," Ren says aloud, repeating the king's words. "Before now, how?" The scholar smiles, a thin, painful expression. "I have spent my life studying the old kings, their history, their powers, their prophecies. I have visited every sacred site, every forgotten temple, every place where their essence still lingered. And yes, once long ago, I felt the forgotten one's present, at his altar in the outer rings. I stood where you stood, gravekeeper, and I felt him sleep." His eyes grow distant, remembering. "I wanted to wake him. I wanted to ask him about the prophecies, about the thief who would sit on an empty throne. But I was young and afraid, and I convinced myself that the time was not right. So I left, and I have regretted that decision every day since." Ren feels the old king's sadness like a physical weight. He could have woken me. He could have ended my long sleep decades ago. But he was afraid. They are all afraid. "Do not blame him," Ren says quietly. "Fear is not a sin. It's what you do despite it that matters." The scholar's eyes widen. "You speak for him. The king speaks through you. We speak together. It's hard to explain." Ren sits on the edge of the bed, meeting the dying man's gaze. "Kale said you have information about the first temple, about the prophecy, about what I am and what I'm supposed to do." "Yes." The scholar struggles to sit up and Lyra moves to help him, propping pillows behind his back. "Yes, I have information, but it is not complete. The first temple is not a place you can find on a map. It exists at the intersection of worlds, in the space between reality and what lies beyond. To reach it, you must be worthy. You must prove that you are the one the prophecy named." "How do I prove that?" The scholar's eyes gleam. "There is a trial, a test that only the true vessel can survive. It is spoken of in the oldest texts, the ones that predate the monarchs themselves. The trial of echoes, they call it. A journey into the heart of memory where the past and present and future all exist at once. If you pass, the temple will reveal itself. If you fail, you will be erased from existence as if you never were." Lyra makes a sound of protest, but her father raises a trembling hand to silence her. He must know, he must understand what he faces. The scholar's eyes never leave Ren's. The trial is not a physical challenge. It is a test of spirit, of will, of identity. You will face your deepest fears, your greatest failures, your most painful memory. You will be offered chances to change the past, to undo your regrets, to become someone else. And you must refuse them all. You must remain yourself, completely and utterly, or the trial will consume you. Ren feels the old king stir, and for the first time he senses fear from the presence inside him. I have heard of this trial. It is how the first vessels were chosen in the age before the monarchs. It is dangerous, even for a king. Why would I need to take this trial? Ren asks. I'm already a vessel. The old king already chose me. The old king chose you in desperation, in a moment of survival. That makes you a vessel, yes, but not necessarily the vessel. The prophecy speaks of one who will not just carry divine power but wield it, one who will challenge the monarchs themselves, and perhaps, if the oldest texts are to be believed, one who will end their reign forever. The scholar's voice drops to a whisper. To be that one, you must be confirmed by the trial. You must be recognized by the first temple itself. Ren is silent, processing. The weight of it all presses down on him, heavier than any mountain. He is a gravekeeper. He is nobody. And yet here he sits, being told that he might be the key to ending the monarchs, to fulfilling an ancient prophecy, to becoming something that has not existed in 10,000 years. You do not have to do this, the old king says gently. You can run, hide, live out your life in obscurity. I will not force you. But even as the words form in his mind, Ren knows he cannot run. Not anymore. The apostles hunt him. A shard is coming. And somewhere in the darkness, the monarch of scorched earth waits for his servants to deliver the stolen spark. Running is just dying slower. How do I find this trial? Ren asks. The scholar smiles, and there is pride in his eyes. I can show you. There is a place, high in these mountains, where the veil between worlds is thin. At the right time, under the right conditions, a doorway to the trial appears. I have spent years calculating the alignment. The next opportunity is in 3 days. 3 days. Ren looks at Lyra, at her sharp face and sharper eyes. And the shard is coming. I have felt its approach like a pressure in the air. The scholar's voice is grim. It will reach these mountains in approximately 5 days, perhaps sooner if it is not slowed by the terrain. You have a narrow window. If you enter the trial and return before the shard arrives, you may have a chance. If not, he does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. 3 days. Ren spends them preparing, though he is not sure what preparation is possible for a trial that exists in the space between worlds. He rests. He eats. He talks with the scholar about the old kings, about the monarchs, about the nature of divine power. He learns that the old king inside him was once called Ethel, the keeper of forgotten things, and that his domain was memory itself. I remember everything, Ethel tells him. Every prayer, every offering, every name spoken at my altar. I am the king of things that would otherwise be lost. And now, I suppose, I am the king of you. The thought is strangely comforting. On the 3rd day, the scholar's condition worsens. His breathing becomes labored, his consciousness fading in and out. But he clings to life, determined to see Ren begin the trial. Lyra carries him, gentle despite her sharp edges, up a hidden path that leads to a plateau near the mountain's peak. The place is ancient. Stone circles, worn by millennia of wind and weather, stand in patterns that speak of rituals long forgotten. At the center, a single pillar rises toward the sky, carved with symbols that Ren cannot read but somehow understand. This is a place of power, Ethel whispers. I can feel it even now. The old magic sleeps here, waiting to be woken. The scholar, supported by Lyra, gestures weakly toward the pillar. When the sun sets, the shadows will align. The doorway will open. You must walk through it, and you must not look back. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you feel, you must keep walking. Do you understand? Ren nods. His heart pounds, but his voice is steady. I understand. The sun descends. The shadows lengthen. And as the last light touches the horizon, the air before the pillar begins to shimmer. It is not a doorway, not exactly. It is more like a wound in reality, a space where the world simply stops being itself and becomes something else. Colors shift and flow. Sounds echo from impossible distances. And from within, a voice calls Ren's name. Not Ethel's voice. Not any voice he recognizes, but his name, spoken with terrible familiarity. Ren. He steps forward. The world dissolves. He is standing in a place that is not a place. A vast emptiness that somehow contains everything. The altar rises before him, but it is not his altar. It is older, grander, covered in offerings that have long since turned to dust. And kneeling before it is a figure he knows. Himself. "You came," says the other Ren, rising and turning. His face is the same, but his eyes are different, older, wiser, filled with a sorrow that Ren does not understand. "I hoped you wouldn't, but I knew you would." "Who are you?" Ren asks. His voice echoes strangely in the nothing space. "I am you, the you that could have been, the you that stayed at the altar, that never met the cultist, that never became a vessel. I'm the path not taken." The other Ren smiles, and it is a sad expression. The trial shows you your possibilities, your regrets, your what-ifs. And then it offers you a choice. You can become me. You can go back to that moment and choose differently. You can have your old life back. Ren stares at his other self, at the peaceful expression, at the hands that have never known the weight of stolen divinity. "The monarch would have taken the spark," he says slowly. "If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't become the vessel, Ethel would have died, really died, forever." "Yes," the other Ren nods. "The old king would have been consumed, but you wouldn't know that. You would never have felt his presence, never have known his name. You would live out your life in peaceful obscurity, tending an empty altar, dying of old age in your sleep. It is a good life, a simple life, the life you were meant to live." Ren thinks about it. He thinks about the cold, the fear, the constant running. He thinks about Kale, risking everything to help a stranger. He thinks about Lyra, carrying her dying father up a mountain because she believed in a prophecy. He thinks about Ethel, sleeping for 10,000 years, waiting for someone to remember him. And he thinks about the monarch, the burning eyes, the voice like the end of the world, the casual destruction of everything in his path. "If I take that life," Ren says quietly, "who stops him? Who faces the shard? Who fulfills the prophecy? That is not your responsibility." The other Ren's voice is gentle, persuasive. "You did not ask for this. You do not owe the world anything. Let someone else be the hero. Let someone else carry the weight. You can be free." "I can be free," Ren repeats. And for a moment the temptation is almost overwhelming. To go back, to be nothing again, to sleep through the nights without fear, to wake without the weight of a king in his soul. But then he remembers the cultist, crawling across the wasteland to deliver his prophecy. He remembers Kale, standing in the canyon, offering to teach a stranger. He remembers Lyra's face when she spoke of her father, the pain beneath the control. And he remembers Ethel's voice the first time he heard it, forgotten, but not gone. "No," Ren says, "I won't take that path. This is my life now. This is who I am." The other Ren smiles, and this time there is pride in it. "Good. That was the first test. There are more, much harder. Keep walking." He fades and Ren walks on. The trial shows him many things. He sees his parents, long dead, and the life he could have had if they had lived. He sees himself as a hunter, powerful and respected, wielding Ethel's power without the king's presence. He sees himself as a monarch, corrupted by divinity, ruling over ashes and ruin. Each vision offers him a choice. Each choice is a temptation to become someone else. And each time he refuses. He walks through memories that are not his own, through futures that will never exist, through pasts that might have been. He feels the weight of 10,000 years of forgotten prayers. He hears the voices of countless worshippers who placed their hope in a king who could not answer. He carries their disappointment, their despair, their fading faith. And still he walks. Ethel's presence buoys him, anchors him, reminds him who he is. But even the old king struggles in this place. The trial was not designed for deities. It was designed for mortals, for the ones brave enough to face themselves and strong enough to survive. At some point, Ren loses track of time. Hours, days, years. There is no way to tell. He only knows that he must keep walking, must keep refusing, must keep being himself no matter what the trial shows him. And then finally he sees it. The first temple. It rises before him, vast and ancient and terrible in its beauty, built of stone that seems to glow from within, carved with symbols that shift and change as he watches. It is not a building so much as a statement, a declaration that some things exist beyond the reach of monarchs, beyond the flow of time, beyond the laws of reality. The doors are open. Ren walks toward them, and for the first time since entering the trial, he feels something like peace. This is where he was meant to be. This is where the answers wait. But as he reaches the threshold, a voice stops him. "Ren!" He turns. Standing behind him is the cultist, the one who crawled to his altar, who spoke the prophecy, who died with his hand gripping Ren's wrist. He looks healthy now, whole, his eyes filled with a gentle light. "You made it," the cultist says. "I knew you would." "You're dead," Ren whispers. "I watched you die." "I am dead, but this is the space between worlds, and here the dead may speak." The cultist smiled. "I have waited a long time for this moment, longer than you know. I was not always a cultist, Ren. I was once a seeker, a student of the old ways. I found the prophecy, read it in the ruins of the first temple, and I knew that I had to find the vessel. I had to deliver the message, even if it cost me my life." "Why?" Ren asks. "Why was it so important?" "Because the prophecy is not just about you. It is about all of us. Every mortal who has ever lived under the shadow of the monarchs, every soul who has hoped for something more." The cultist steps closer and his eyes burn with fervor. "The thief will sit on an empty throne, but the throne is not empty yet. It is occupied by the monarchs, by their tyranny, by their cruelty. You must empty it, Ren. You must tear them down and take their place." "I don't want a throne," Ren says. "I don't want to be a monarch." "No, you don't, and that is why you are the one." The cultist reaches out and touches Ren's chest directly over his heart. Remember who you are. Remember why you walk this path. And when the time comes, remember that you are not alone." He fades, and Ren is alone again, standing before the open doors of the first temple. He steps inside. The interior is vast, larger than the outside suggested, stretching into impossible distances. Pillars rise toward a ceiling that cannot be seen. Light comes from everywhere and nowhere, and at the center, on a dais of pure crystal, sits a throne. It is empty. Ren approaches slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The throne is beautiful, terrible, waiting. He knows, without being told, that if he sits on it, he will change. He will become something more than human, something more than a vessel. He will become a king in truth, with all the power and responsibility that entails. "You do not have to," Ethel whispers. "You can walk away. The temple will not force you." But Ren knows that walking away is not an option. Not anymore. The shard is coming. The monarch waits. And somewhere in the darkness, countless mortals live in fear of powers they cannot challenge. He turns and sits on the throne. The universe explodes. At least that is what it feels like. In reality, Ren's consciousness simply expands at a rate that should be impossible, stretching outward to encompass dimensions he never knew existed. He feels the weight of every star, the breath of every living thing, the pulse of every divine essence scattered across the cosmos. For one eternal moment, he is everything and everywhere and everyone. Then the contraction begins. It is agony, not physical pain, but something deeper, more fundamental. His sense of self, carefully maintained through the trial, is stretched to the breaking point. Memories that are not his own flood into him. Emotions that belong to 1,000 worshippers crash against his soul. He feels the deaths of kings, the births of worlds, the slow crawl of time across uncountable ages. And through it all he holds. He remembers who he is. Ren, gravekeeper, vessel, the one who chose to sit on an empty throne. Slowly the chaos subsides. The universe shrinks back to manageable proportion. Ren opens his eyes and finds himself still seated on the crystal throne, still in the first temple, but everything has changed. He can see the threads. They are everywhere, stretching through the air, through the walls, through his own body. Golden threads and silver threads and threads of deepest black, all connected, all pulsing with energy. He reaches out and touches one and instantly understands. It is the thread of a mortal life, somewhere far away, connected to him by choices not yet made. "What am I seeing?" he whispers. "The weave of fate," Ethel answers, and the old king's voice is different now. Stronger, clearer, the connections between all things. "You are seeing what only kings can see, Ren. The throne has given you divine sight. But I'm not a king, I'm still me. Yes, that is the miracle. You are the first mortal in 10,000 years to sit on this throne and remain yourself. The first to carry divine power without being consumed by it. You have done what even the monarchs could not do, Ren. You have become something new." Ren stands and the threads move with him, flowing like water around his body. He walks through the temple, and everywhere he looks, he sees connections. The temple itself is woven into the fabric of reality, anchored by threads that lead to every sacred site, every place of power, every forgotten altar across the world. And one thread, thicker than the others, black as oblivion, leads directly to him. He follows it with his divine sight, tracing its path through the walls of the temple, through the space between worlds, back to the mountain plateau where his physical body waits. And beyond, beyond the mountains, beyond the crucible, beyond the kingdoms and the wastelands, to a place of fire and ash and burning throne, the monarch of scorched earth. He is connected to Ren by that black thread, a bond of hatred and hunger and stolen power. And through that thread, Ren can feel him, can feel his fury at the failed harvest, his impatience with his apostle, his anticipation as the shard draws closer to its prey. The shard. Ren follows another thread, thinner but no less urgent, and sees it. A creature of living flame and shadow, descending through the mortal realm with terrible purpose. It moves faster than any mortal could, crossing miles in heartbeats, leaving scorched earth in its wake. It will reach the mountains before nightfall. Time moves differently in the first temple. Ren has been here for what felt like hours, but in the mortal world only moments have passed. He still has a chance. He returns to the throne and places his hands on its arms. Power flows into him, not from Ethel this time, but from the temple itself. Knowledge, understanding, and a gift. He knows now what he must do. The journey back through the trial is faster, easier. The visions still appear, the temptations still whisper, but Ren walks through them without pause. He is no longer the uncertain gravekeeper who entered. He is something more. When he steps out of the shimmering doorway onto the mountain plateau, the sun has not yet fully set. Lyra gasps and steps back, her hand going to her weapon. Even the scholar, slumped in his daughter's arms, manages a weak smile. "You're different," Lyra says. "It is not a question." "I am." Ren looks at his hands, still the same hands that placed flowers on an altar but somehow changed. "The trial changed me. The temple gave me. I don't know how to explain it." "You don't have to." The scholar's voice is barely a whisper. "I can see it in your eyes. You sat on the throne, you survived. You are the one." Ren crosses to them, kneeling beside the dying man. "Thank you for believing in me, for waiting. I would have waited forever." The scholar reaches up, his trembling hand touching Ren's cheek. "Tell me, what did you see?" "I saw the threads, the connections between all things. I saw the shard coming, and I saw—" Ren hesitates. "I saw a way to fight it." The scholar's eyes light up with a final, desperate hope. "Then go. Don't waste time on an old man who is already dead. Go and prove that the prophecy was true. Go and show the monarchs that they are not invincible." Lyra makes a sound of protest, but her father silences her with a look. "Take care of him, daughter. He carries the weight of worlds now. He will need someone who believes." Ren stands. He wants to stay, wants to offer comfort, wants to be there when the scholar finally slips away. But the black thread pulses with urgency, and he can feel the shard getting closer. "I'll come back," he promises. "After I'll come back." The scholar smiles and his eyes close. "I know you will." Lyra stays with her father while Ren descends the mountain. He moves faster than he should, his new divine sight showing him the safest path, the surest footing. The threads guide him, and he follows without question. At the base of the mountain, in a narrow valley where the shadows gather thickest, he waits. The shard arrives at sunset. It does not walk or fly or descend from the sky. It simply appears, tearing through reality with the same casual violence as its creator. Where it stands, the grass withers. The rocks crack. The very air seems to burn. It is beautiful in the way that wildfires are beautiful, terrible in the way that avalanches are terrible. A humanoid form of living flame, its eyes pits of darkness, its hands wreathed in power that could reduce cities to ash. "You," it speaks, and its voice is the monarch's voice filtered through a mortal vessel. "The thief, the vessel, I have come to reclaim what was stolen." Ren stands his ground. The threads swirl around him, showing him possibilities, futures that branch and split with every heartbeat. In most of them, he dies. In most of them, the shard tears him apart and consumes the spark. But not all. "I'm not a thief," Ren says quietly. "I'm a gravekeeper, and the power I carry was never yours to take." The shard laughs, a sound like breaking stone. "Mortal, you understand nothing. The old kings are dead. Their power belongs to those strong enough to claim it. Your monarch claimed it through right of conquest. You stole it through chance and desperation. There is no comparison." "Then why are you here?" Ren asks. "If I'm so insignificant, why send a shard? Why not just forget about me and move on?" The shard's flames flicker just for an instant. Because you are an anomaly, a variable that must be eliminated, the monarch's plans cannot tolerate uncertainty. Ah, Ren nods slowly. So I scare him. The great monarch of Scorched Earth who destroys kingdoms for fun is afraid of a gravekeeper. The shard's response is immediate and violent. It launches forward, a comet of destruction, its flaming hand reaching for Ren's throat. Ren raises his own hand and says, "No." Absolute nullification explodes from him, but it is different now, stronger, more precise. The field of negation expands to meet the shard's attack, and where they touch, the shard's flame simply stop, not extinguished, not blocked, erased from existence. The shard recoils, shock replacing fury on its features. What is this? Your power was nothing, a spark, a flicker. This is the throne, Ren says. The first temple, the trial. I am more than a vessel now, shard. I am the one the prophecy named, and you cannot touch me. He advances, and the shard steps back. For the first time in its existence, the fragment of a monarch's will feels something it has never experienced. Fear. I will destroy you, the shard snarls, gathering its power for a final, desperate strike. I will annihilate your soul and scatter your essence across the void. The monarch's will cannot be denied by a mortal worm. It attacks with everything it has. Fire and shadow and divine fury, a concentrated blast of destruction that would level a city. The valley lights up like a second sun, and the mountains themselves tremble at the release of power. Ren stands in the center of it all, and expands his nullification. The field grows, pushing back against the shard's attack. Where the two powers meet, reality itself seems to flicker and fail. The threads of fate scream and writhe. And Ren, standing at the heart of the storm, feels something he has never felt before. Certainty. He is exactly where he belongs, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The prophecy, the trial, the throne, all of it led to this moment. This confrontation between a fragment of tyranny and a gravekeeper who refused to be forgotten. The nullification pushes harder. The shard's attack wavers, weakens, fails. And then, with a sound like the universe itself weeping, the shard's power collapses. It stands before Ren, naked and afraid, its flames extinguished, its shadow form flickering. For the first time, Ren sees what it truly is, a prisoner, a piece of the monarch's will, given form and sent to die because the monarch could not bear to come himself. Please, the shard whispers, and it is the monarch's voice but broken, afraid. Don't. Ren looks at it, at the terrified thing that was sent to kill him, and feels something unexpected. Pity. Go back, he says. Tell your creator what you saw here. Tell him that the gravekeeper remembers. Tell him that the forgotten king has found his vessel. And tell him, Ren pauses, meeting the shard's eyes. Tell him that his throne is not as secure as he believes. He releases the shard. It does not attack again, it simply dissolves, its form unraveling, its essence returning to the monarch who created it. The valley is silent. The flames are gone. Only Ren remains, standing in the ashes of his first true victory. You let it live, Ethel observes. You showed mercy to a thing that would have shown you none. It wasn't mercy, Ren says quietly. It was a message. The monarch needs to know that I'm not afraid of him, that I understand what he is, and that I'm coming for him. Coming for him? Ethel's voice holds a note of surprise. You plan to attack a monarch in his own realm. Not yet. Ren turns and begins the climb back up the mountain. First, I need to understand. The temple showed me the threads, but I don't know how to use them. I need to learn, I need to grow, and I need allies. Allies? There are others who hate the monarchs, others who remember the old kings, others who would fight if they had someone to follow. Ren thinks of Kale, somewhere in hiding, of Lyra grieving her father, of all the mortals who have lived their entire lives under the shadow of divine tyranny. The prophecy said the thief would sit on an empty throne, but the throne isn't empty yet, so I guess I'll have to empty it first. The scholar dies that night peacefully, with his daughter's hand in his, and Ren's promise echoing in his ears. They bury him on the mountain. Beneath the stars he spent his life studying, and Lyra weeps for the first time since Ren met her. When dawn breaks, she is waiting for him outside the cave, her sharp face set in determined lines. What now, she asks. Now we find Kale, we gather information, we build something. Ren looks out over the mountains, toward the distant kingdoms, toward the crucible, toward the burning throne that waits in another realm entirely. The monarch thinks this is over. He thinks sending a shard was the end of it, but it's just the beginning. The beginning of what? Ethel asks. Ren smiles, and there is something in that smile that was not there before. Something ancient, something patient, something that has sat on an empty throne and seen the threads of fate and understood that even kings can fall. The beginning of the end, he says, for all of them. They descend the mountain together, the gravekeeper and the hunter's daughter, carrying the weight of a prophecy and the spark of a forgotten king. Behind them, the first temple waits in the space between worlds, its empty throne patient, its secrets still unfolding. And somewhere in the realm of fire and ash, the monarch of scorched earth receives his shard's final message. He sits on his burning throne and feels, for the first time in 10,000 years, something that might be fear. The thief is coming, and the throne he means to sit on is not empty yet. But it will be. 3 months pass like water through fingers. Ren spends them in motion, moving from one hidden place to another, always just ahead of the hunters who still seek him. The monarch's apostles have not given up. If anything, they have redoubled their efforts, spreading across the continent like a plague, offering rewards that could buy kingdoms. But Ren has something they do not: the threads. His divine sight has grown sharper with practice. He can now see the weave of fate not just as a passive observer, but as an active participant. He sees the paths that lead to danger and avoids them. He sees the paths that lead to opportunity and takes them. He sees the people who are connected to his destiny, the ones who will help or hinder, the ones who will live or die based on choices not yet made. It is exhausting. It is exhilarating. It is slowly driving him mad. You see too much, Ethel warns him one night, as they camp in the ruins of an old temple dedicated to a king even the scholar had never heard of. The mortal mind was not designed to perceive the infinite. You must rest. You must forget sometimes, or the weight will crush you. How do I forget? Ren asks, his voice hollow. How do I close my eyes when I can see every possible future where the people I care about die? You trust, you have allies now. Let them carry some of the weight. Ren looks across the fire at Lyra, who sleeps with her hand on her weapon even in rest. At Kale, who emerged from hiding 2 weeks ago, his eyes widening when he saw what Ren had become. At the others who have begun to gather, drawn by whispers of a prophet who can see the unseen, a vessel who carries a king, a thief who will sit on an empty throne. There are not many of them yet. A dozen, perhaps, hunters who remember the old ways, scholars who studied forbidden texts, refugees who lost everything to the monarchs and their servants. They are not an army. They are not even a threat, not really. But they are a beginning. The apostles are getting closer, Kale says, joining Ren by the fire. The old hunter moves more slowly now, his wounds from the chase never fully healing, but his eyes are as sharp as ever. They've narrowed our location to this region. Another week, maybe 2, and they'll find us. Then we won't be here. Ren stares into the flames, seeing not fire but threads, countless threads, weaving and unweaving with every passing moment. There's a place, in the eastern mountains, an old stronghold from before the monarchs rose. It's hidden, protected. We can make a stand there. A stand? Kale raises an eyebrow. You're planning to fight. I'm planning to survive. There's a difference. Ren looks up, meeting the old hunter's gaze. The shard was just the beginning. The monarch knows I'm dangerous now. He'll send more, stronger, and eventually he'll find a way to come himself, convergence or no convergence. You sound like you've seen it. I have, in the threads. 100 different futures, 1,000, and in most of them we lose. Ren's voice is steady, but there is pain beneath it. But not all. In some we win. In some the throne empties. I just have to find the path that leads there. Kale is silent for a long moment. Then he reaches out and grips Ren's shoulder. You've changed, boy. When I first met you, you could barely look a pit fighter in the eye. Now you're talking about challenging kings. I'm not challenging them, not yet. Ren stands, stretching muscles that still ache from days of hard travel. First, I need to understand them, their weaknesses, their history, the things they don't want anyone to know. And where do you find that kind of information? Ren smiles, and there is something in that smile that makes even Kale, veteran of 100 battles, shiver slightly. The same place I found the prophecy, the first temple. It's time I went back. The journey to the temple is different this time. Ren does not need the scholar's calculations or the mountain portal. He carries the temple within him now, a connection forged by the throne. He simply closes his eyes, follows the threads, and steps through the space between worlds. The temple welcomes him. It is vast as before, beautiful as before, but now it feels like home. The pillars bow slightly as he passes, the light dims and brightens in patterns that might be greeting, and the throne at the center pulses with a warmth that Ren has come to associate with Ethel's presence. You have grown, the temple speaks, and its voice is the voice of a million forgotten worshippers, a choir of ghosts. You have become what we hoped. I need answers, Ren says. The monarchs, their origins, their weaknesses, the things they've hidden since the beginning. The monarchs were once like you. Mortals who seized divine power and refused to let go. Ren stops. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? 10,000 years ago there were no monarchs. There were only kings and mortals, separate but connected. Then came the convergence, the first one, the one that changed everything. Mortals discovered they could steal divine essence, could fuse with dying kings, could become something new. The temple shows him images, memories preserved in crystal and light. He sees the first mortal king, a hunter like any other, standing over the corpse of a slain deity and drinking its power like wine. He sees others follow, a flood of ambitious mortals who saw divinity as the ultimate prize. They called themselves monarchs. They declared themselves rulers of all, and they hunted the old kings to extinction, consuming them one by one until only the spark remained, until only Ethel survived, hiding in his forgotten altar, waiting for someone worthy to find him. But if they were mortal once, Ren says slowly, then they can still be hurt, still be killed. They're not true kings at all. They are kings now. 10,000 years of power have changed them. But yes, beneath the divinity, the mortal core remains. It is their greatest strength and their only weakness. Strike at that core and the monarch falls. How? The temple is silent for a long moment. When it speaks again, its voice is heavy with ancient sorrow. There is a weapon, the only weapon ever forged that can kill a monarch. It was created in the first days of the uprising by the last true kings before they died. They poured everything into it, their remaining power, their hopes, their very essence. And then they hid it, knowing that if it fell into the wrong hands, all would be lost. Where? We do not know. The ones who hid it took the secret to their graves. But there are clues. Fragments of prophecy scattered across the world, pieces of a puzzle that only the worthy can solve. Ren closes his eyes, reaching out with his divine sight. The threads spread before him, countless paths leading to countless destinations. And there, faint but unmistakable, a thread of pure gold that seems to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. The weapon, he breathes. I can see it just barely. It's hidden behind layers of protection, but it's there. Then you know what you must do. Ren opens his eyes. Yes, I have to find it before the monarchs find me, before they realize what I'm planning. He turns to leave, then pauses. Thank you for everything. Go, child of prophecy. Go and become what we always hoped mortals could be. Go and remind the false kings that even the highest throne can be empty. Ren steps back through the space between worlds, returning to the camp, to his people, to the war that has only just begun. When he opens his eyes, Lyra is standing before him, her face pale, her hand on her weapon. They're here, she says. The apostles, they found us. Ren does not need his divine sight to feel the truth of her words. The air itself has changed, growing heavy with the pressure of divine purpose. Through the trees, he can see flickers of crimson, hear the whispered prayers of the faithful. How many? Dozens, maybe more. They surrounded the camp during the night. Lyra's voice is steady, but her eyes betray her fear. We can't fight them all, Ren. We can't even run. Ren looks at his people, at the refugees and scholars and broken hunters who believed in him. At Kale, standing with his back to a tree, his old sword in his hand, ready to die for a cause he only half understands. At the children who should never have been caught up in this war. And he makes a choice. Yes, he says, we can. He steps forward, walking toward the tree line, toward the waiting apostle. Lyra calls after him, but he does not stop. The threads swirl around him, showing him possibilities, and he chooses the one that leads to survival. The apostles see him coming. They fan out, weapons ready, prayers on their lips. Their leader, a woman with eyes like burning coals and a face carved from ice, steps forward to meet him. Ren, the vessel, you are charged with theft of divine essence, with murder of the monarch's servants, with heresy against the true kings. Surrender now, and your death will be quick. Ren stops a few feet from her. He looks at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the devotion that drives her, and he feels something he has not felt in a long time. Pity. You serve a false king, he says quietly. The monarchs were once mortal like you, like me. They stole their power and called it divine. They killed the true kings and called it justice. And they have ruled through fear and lies ever since. The apostle's eyes narrow. Blasphemy. Truth. Ren reaches out with his divine sight and touches the thread that connects her to the monarch. It is black, like all such threads, but there is something else there. A flicker of gold, a remnant of the person she was before the fire consumed her. You can still choose, he says. You can still walk away. The monarch does not own you. He only convinced you that he does. For just a moment something flickers in the apostle's eyes. Doubt, memory. Then it is gone, replaced by fury. Kill him, she orders. Kill them all. The apostles surge forward. Ren raises his hands and expands his nullification. It is different now, shaped by months of practice and the power of the throne. The field spreads outward not as a wall but as a wave, washing over the charging apostles, touching each of them individually. It does not kill. It does not even harm. It simply negates. Their weapons vanish. Their spells dissolve. Their connection to the monarch, the source of their power, flickers and dies. They stop, confused, afraid. For the first time in years, they are simply human again. The apostle leader stares at her hands, at the emptiness where her power used to be. Her face contorts with rage and terror, and something that might be relief. What have you done? She whispers. I've given you a choice, Ren says. The same choice I was given. The same choice every mortal has, whether they know it or not. You can keep serving a false king, knowing now that his power is borrowed, not earned. Or you can walk away. You can find your own path. You can become something more than a tool. He turns his back on her, walking toward his people, toward the camp, toward the future that waits. Behind him, the apostles do not move. They stand in the clearing, empty-handed and empty-hearted, staring at the space where their king used to be. Will they follow us? Lyra asks as Ren rejoins her. Some will, some won't. Most will need time to understand what just happened. He looks at her, at the hope and fear warring in her eyes. But that's not important right now. What's important is that we survived, and we have a new purpose. Which is? Ren smiles. We're going to find a weapon, the only weapon that can kill a monarch, and then we're going to end this, once and for all. The camp erupts in cheers, but Ren barely hears them. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, on the threads that lead to golden weapons and burning thrones and futures yet unwritten. The thief has begun his work, and the empty throne waits. The search for the weapon takes them across the continent and beyond. Ren leads his small band through ancient forests where the trees remember the first kings, across deserts that were once ocean, into caves where the darkness itself seems alive. Every step is guided by the threads, by the golden path that only he can see. Every step brings them closer to their goal, and every step attracts more attention. The monarchs know now, all of them. Word has spread through the divine realm like wildfire. A vessel has risen. A thief has sat on the first temple's throne. A mortal has defeated a shard and stripped apostles of their power. The other monarchs, those who watched the burning one's failure with amusement, have stopped laughing. Ren feels their attention like a pressure on his soul. They cannot find him, not yet. The threads hide him as much as they guide him, but they are looking, and eventually they will look in the right place. We need to move faster, he tells Kale one night as they camp at the edge of a vast swamp. The monarchs are coordinating. I can feel it. They're sharing information, pooling resources. If we don't find the weapon soon, then we fight without it. Kale's voice is grim. We've faced apostles before. We've faced shards. We can face monarchs. No, Ren shakes his head. You don't understand. A monarch descending in full power. It's not like the shard. It's not like anything we've faced. The shard was a fraction of the burning one's will. A monarch is the whole thing. We can't fight that without the weapon. We can't even survive it. Kale is silent for a long moment. Then, how close are we? Ren closes his eyes, reaching for the golden thread. It pulses faintly, somewhere to the east, beyond the swamp, beyond the mountains that rise on the horizon. Close days, maybe, but the monarchs are close too. They've sent something big. I can feel it coming. What kind of something? I don't know, but it's not a shard. It's more. Ren opens his eyes and there is fear in them, fear he cannot hide. Kale, if this thing catches us before we find the weapon, then we make sure it doesn't catch us. The old hunter stands, his joints popping, his hand on his sword. We've come too far to stop now. We'll push through the swamp tonight. No rest. No breaks. We reach the mountains by dawn or we die trying. Ren nods. He turns to rouse the others, but Lyra is already moving, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Within minutes, the camp is packed and the band is moving, wading into the murky waters of the swamp. The swamp is alive with things that should not exist. Giant insects with too many legs, plants that reach for passing flesh, patches of water that are not water at all but gateways to somewhere else. Ren's divine sight shows him the dangers, guides them around the worst of it, but even he cannot predict everything. They lose 3 people that night, swallowed by the swamp, pulled under by things that move too fast to see. Ren wants to stop, wants to search, wants to mourn, but Kale pushes him forward. They knew the risks. We all did. Keep moving. By dawn, they emerge from the swamp, exhausted and diminished, but alive. The mountains rise before them, jagged and forbidding, and somewhere in their depths, the golden thread pulses with urgent light. It's close, Ren breathed. Very close. A day's march, maybe less. Then we march. Lyra's voice is hoarse, but her eyes are fierce. We didn't come this far to stop now. They march. The mountains are harder than the swamp, steeper, colder. The air grows thin and the paths grow treacherous. Twice, they lose people to falls. Once, they are attacked by creatures that seem made of the mountain itself, stone and fury given form. Ren's nullification saves them, but barely. And all the while, the thing behind them draws closer. Ren feels it like a weight on his soul, a pressure that grows with every passing hour. It is not a shard. It is not an apostle. It is something new, something the monarchs have created specifically for him. A hunter designed to find what even their divine sight cannot. We're running out of time, he tells Kale as they rest in a cave halfway up the mountain. Whatever's following us, it'll be here by nightfall, maybe sooner. Then we find the weapon today. Kale's voice leaves no room for argument. We push harder, we go faster, we leave behind anyone who can't keep up. Ren wants to protest, but he knows the old hunter is right. The weapon is their only chance. Without it, they all die. With it, at least some of them might survive. All right, he says, we go now. They leave the wounded behind, with promises to return. The healthy push on, climbing faster than should be possible, driven by desperation and the growing pressure of the thing behind them. And then, as the sun reaches its zenith, they find it. The cave is hidden behind a frozen waterfall, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. Ren knows because the golden thread leads directly to it, pulsing with triumphant light. He pushes through the ice, into the darkness beyond, and the others follow. The cave opens into a vast chamber, natural but shaped by ancient hand. Pillars of crystal rise toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Symbols carved into the walls glow with faint light. And at the center, on a pedestal of pure obsidian, rests the weapon. It is a spear, simple in design, devastating in implication. Its shaft is carved from wood that has not rotted in 10,000 years. Its head is crystal, clear as water, containing within it a light that seems to hold all the colors of existence. It hums with power, with purpose, with the final hope of dying kings. The Kinkeler, Ren whispers, and the name feels right, feels true. He approaches the pedestal, his hand reaching for the spear. But as his fingers near the shaft, the weapon flares with light, and a voice echoes through the chamber. Who comes to claim the last hope of the fallen? Ren stops. A figure materializes before the pedestal, translucent and ancient. An old king, or the memory of one, preserved by the weapon's power. I am Ren, he says, gravekeeper vessel, the one the prophecy named. The figure studies him with eyes that have seen universes born and die. You carry Ethel within you, the keeper of forgotten things. He chose well. I remember you, Ethel speaks, and the figure smiles. You were the first to fall, the first monarch killed by mortals. I was, and in dying I learned what the false kings refused to accept, that power borrowed is not power owned, that thrones built on theft will always crumble. The figure gestures to the spear. This weapon was forged from my essence, and from the essence of all who died in the first days. It is the only thing that can truly kill a monarch, but it will only serve one who is worthy. How do I prove worthiness? You already have. You sat on the empty throne and remained yourself. You faced the trial and refused to become another. You carry a king without being consumed. You are worthy, Ren. The spear is yours. The figure fades, and the weapon's light dims to a gentle pulse. Ren reaches out and takes it. The moment his hand closes around the shaft, power floods through him. Not the stolen power of the monarchs, not the borrowed power of a vessel, but something older, something purer. The combined essence of every true king who died in the uprising, channeled through a single weapon, waiting for a worthy hand. He understands now. He understands what he must do. It's time, he says, turning to face his companions. The thing behind us, it's almost here, and it's not alone. The monarchs know we've found the weapon. They're coming, all of them. Kale's face pales, but his voice is steady. Then we fight. We fight. Ren grips the spear tighter, feeling its power flow through him. But not here. Not like this. We lead them away from the innocent. We lead them to a place where the battle won't destroy everything we're trying to save. Where? Lyra asks. Ren closes his eyes, reaching for the threads. They spread before him, countless possibilities, countless futures. And there, at the edge of everything, he sees it. A place where the battle can be fought. A place where the monarchs can be met on equal ground. The first temple, he says. It exists outside reality, outside the monarch's domain. If we can draw them there, the temple itself will aid us. The ground will be neutral. The battle will be possible. Draw them there. Kale's voice is sharp. How do you draw a monarch anywhere? Ren opens his eyes, and there is something in them that was not there before. Certainty. Purpose. The weight of 10,000 years of waiting. I hold the Kinkeler. I carry Ethel's spark. I am the one the prophecy named. They will come for me because they have no choice. I am the biggest threat to their existence since the first uprising. They cannot afford to let me live. He walks toward the cave entrance, toward the frozen waterfall, toward the thing that waits beyond. Stay here, he says, all of you. If I succeed, the threat ends. If I fail, you'll need to carry on, find another vessel, train another thief. Don't let the prophecy die with me. Lyra steps forward, her hand reaching for him. Ren. He turns and kisses her forehead, gentle and quick. Thank you for believing, for following, for everything. Then he steps through the ice and into the light. The thing that has been hunting them waits at the base of the mountain. It is not a shard. It is not an apostle. It is a fusion of both, a creature crafted from a dozen divine wills, given form and purpose by the combined power of the monarchs. It stands twice the height of a man, its body a shifting mass of limbs and eyes and mouths, each one crying out with a different voice. Thief, it speaks, and its voice is the voice of all monarchs at once. You cannot run, you cannot hide. Surrender the weapon and die quickly, or keep it and die slowly. The choice is yours. Ren descends the mountain, the Kinkeler in his hand, his divine sight showing him the threads that connect this creature to its creators. They are thick, these threads, pulsing with borrowed power, but they are also fragile, vulnerable. You're not real, Ren says as he approaches. You're just a puppet, a tool. The monarchs send you to die because they're too afraid to come themselves. The creature roars and charges. Ren raises the Kinkeler. The battle is short. The Kinkeler was made for this, for cutting through borrowed divinity, for severing the threads that connect false kings to their stolen power. Ren swings once, and the creature's left side dissolves. He swings twice, and its right side follows. He swings a third time, and the thing collapses into its component parts, the divine wills that formed it screaming as they're severed from their creators. When it is over, Ren stands alone on the mountainside, surrounded by fatting echoes of divine power. The Kinkeler hums in his hand, satisfied. But there is no time to rest. As the creature dies, its creators feel it, and in their realms, on their thrones, the monarchs of the world rise as one. He has their attention now, all of it. Ren closes his eyes and reaches for the thread that leads to the first temple. It pulses warmly, waiting. He follows it, stepping through the space between worlds, leaving the mortal realm behind. The temple welcomes him like a returning sun. He walks through its halls, past its pillars to the throne at its center. But he does not sit, not yet. Instead, he stands before it, the Kinkeler ready, and waits. They come one by one at first. The lesser monarchs, rulers of small domains and petty fiefdoms. They arrive in the temple's vast hall, their divine forms flickering with uncertainty. This place is not their realm. Its rules are not their rules. They are vulnerable here, and they know it. But they come anyway because the alternative is worse. A weapon that can kill them, a vessel who can wield it, a prophecy that threatens everything they've built. You cannot win, one of them speaks, a monarch of shadows and secrets. We are many, you are one. Even with that weapon, even in this place, you cannot defeat us all. I don't have to defeat you all, Ren replies. I just have to defeat enough of you that the rest lose their nerve. He attacks. The Kinkeler sings in his hands, a weapon finally fulfilling its purpose. Each strike severs a thread, cuts through borrowed divinity, sends a monarch screaming back to their realm, wounded and diminished. One falls, then another, then a third. But there are always more. They come in waves now, drawn by the commotion, by the threat, by the ancient fear that has haunted them since the first uprising. Ren fights them all, the Kinkeler never tiring, his divine sight showing him every attack before it lands. He is a whirlwind of death, a force of nature, a gravekeeper who became something more. But even he has limits. The Monarch of Scorched Earth arrives when Ren is already wounded, already exhausted, already running on fumes. The Burning One descends into the temple's hall like a comet, his flames consuming the shadows, his fury palpable. "Thief," he roars, "you stole from me, you killed my shard, you humiliated my apostles, and now you dare to challenge me in this place." Ren raises the Kinkeler, but his arms shake with fatigue. "I dare, because someone has to." The Burning One laughs, a terrible sound. "You are magnificent, truly. I understand now why the prophecy chose you, but magnificence is not enough. It has never been enough." He attacks. Their battle shakes the temple to its foundation. Fire meets nullification, divine will meets divine purpose. 10,000 years of tyranny meets one mortal's desperate hope. The Kinkeler cuts and burns, severs and destroys, but the Burning One is ancient, powerful, relentless. Ren is losing. He feels it in his bones, in his soul, in the fatting presence of Ethel, who pours everything he has into supporting his vessel. The old king is dying, truly dying this time, his spark flickering as he gives his last to the fight. "Ren," Ethel whispers, "I am sorry, I cannot." "Don't," Ren gasps, parrying another blow. "Don't you dare give up, not now, not when we're so close." "I am not giving up, I am giving everything. There is a difference." The old king's presence surges, filling Ren with final, desperate power. The nullification expands, pushing back against the Burning One's flame. The Kinkeler blazes with renewed light, and Ren, fueled by the sacrifice of the king who chose him, attacks with everything he has. The Burning One screams. The Kinkeler pierces his core, finds the mortal heart beneath 10,000 years of borrowed divinity, and severs it forever. The Monarch of Scorched Earth, the Ashen Lord, the burning throne, crumbles into ash and silence. The remaining monarchs flee. Ren stands alone in the temple's hall, surrounded by the ashes of a king, the Kinkeler still in his hand. Ethel is gone. He can feel the absence, the silence where the old king's voice used to be. The spark that fused with him has finally burned out, giving everything to the final strike. He is alone now, truly alone. But he is also victorious. The temple speaks, its voice gentle. "You have done what none before could do. You have killed a monarch. You have emptied a throne." The prophecy unfolds. Ren looks at the Kinkeler, at the ashes, at the empty space where his friend used to reside. Tears stream down his face, but his voice is steady. "It's not enough. One throne emptied, so many more remain. Then you will empty them, one by one. As long as you draw breath, as long as you carry hope, you will empty them all." Ren nods. He turns from the ashes, from the memory of Ethel, from the battle that cost him everything. The Kinkeler hums in his hand, ready for the next fight. He walks out of the temple, back toward the mortal realm, back toward his people, back toward the war that has only just begun. The thief has emptied one throne, but the empty throne he was promised still waits, and he will not rest until he sits on it. The years that follow are measured in battles. Ren returns to his people not as a gravekeeper, not as a vessel, but as something new. The death of Ethel has changed him, hollowed him out and filled him with purpose. He carries the Kinkeler now as an extension of himself, and the weapon's power flows through his veins like blood. They call him the Thronebreaker. The name spreads across the continent, whispered by those who hope and those who fear. Ren leads his growing army from victory to victory, hunting the monarchs in their own realms, using the first temple as a base of operations. One by one, the false kings fall. One by one, their thrones empty. The monarch of shadows falls in the depths of his own realm, the Kinkeler piercing the darkness that sustained him for millennia. The monarch of storms falls on a mountain peak, lightning availing nothing against the weapon that severs divinity. The monarch of chains falls in her own prison, freed by the very slaves she thought she owned. Each victory costs Ren something, pieces of himself that he cannot get back, memories of Ethel that fade with time, the faces of friends who die in battles he cannot fight alone. Lyra falls defending a village from apostles. Kale falls in the final charge against a monarch's fortress. The others, the dozens who joined because they believe, they fall one by one until Ren is surrounded by ghosts and memories and the weight of everything he has lost. But he does not stop, cannot stop. The prophecy drives him forward, the empty throne waiting at the end of everything. On the 10th year of his war, Ren stands before the last monarch. She is called the Queen of Whispers, and her realm is silence. She has watched her brethren fall one by one, has felt their deaths through the threads that connected them, and she has prepared. Her fortress is built from the bones of kings. Her servants are shadows given form, and her power is the oldest of all. The power of fear. You have come far, Thronebreaker, she speaks, and her voice is the voice of every doubt Ren has ever had. You have killed many, lost many, sacrificed everything. And for what? A prophecy written by the dead, a throne that may not exist. Ren raises the Kinkeler. For hope, for the mortals who lived in fear, for the ones who couldn't fight back. The mortals. The queen smiles, and it is a terrible expression. You were mortal once. Are you still? After 10 years of carrying that weapon, after killing kings and absorbing their essence, after everything you've done, what remains of the gravekeeper who tended a forgotten altar? The question hits Ren like a physical blow. He feels it in the hollow place where Ethel used to be, in the silence where his friends' voices once echoed. What remains of him? What is left after all the battles, all the losses, all the years? I don't know, he admits, but I know what I'm fighting for, and that's enough. He attacks. The battle lasts 3 days. The Queen of Whispers is the most powerful monarch Ren has ever faced. She uses his memories against him, his grief, his guilt. She shows him Lyra dying, Kale falling, Ethel fatting. She shows him every failure, every mistake, every moment of weakness. But she cannot show him anything he has not already faced. Ren fights through the visions, through the doubts, through the fear. The Kinkeler blazes in his hands, severing threads, cutting through lies. He pursues the queen through her realm of silence, chasing her to the heart of her power. And there, in a chamber built from the collected fears of 10,000 years, he finally corners her. It ends, he says, now forever. The queen looks at him, and for the first time he sees fear in her eyes. Real fear, the fear of something that has never truly faced death. You will be alone, she whispers. When I fall, you will have nothing left to fight, no purpose, no prophecy, no war. What will you be then, Thronebreaker? What will remain? Ren raises the Kinkeler. I'll find out. He strikes. The Queen of Whispers crumbles into silence, her essence scattering, her throne empty. Ren stands in the aftermath, alone in a chamber of fears, surrounded by the echoes of a king's death. It is over. The war that began with a dying cultist and a forgotten altar has finally ended. Every monarch is dead. Every throne is empty. The mortal realm is free for the first time in 10,000 years. Ren returns to the first temple. He walks through its halls, past its pillars to the throne at its center. It glows with the same gentle light as when he first saw it, waiting, patient, eternal. He sits. The power that floods through him is different this time. Not the borrowed power of a vessel, not the weaponized power of the Kinkeler, but something purer. The temple accepts him, welcomes him, makes him part of its ancient purpose. He is the throne breaker no longer. He is something new, something that has not existed since the first kings walked the earth. A true king, born from mortality, forged in war, tested by loss. Ren sits on the empty throne and looks out over the threads of fate. They spread before him, countless possibilities, countless futures, mortals living free of monarchs, kingdoms rising and falling, hope flourishing where fear once ruled. And there, at the edge of everything, he sees a thread that leads back to the beginning, to a forgotten altar on a windswept hill, to a gravekeeper placing flowers before a weathered statue, to a dying cultist whispering a prophecy that changed everything. The thief will sit on an empty throne. Ren smiles, and there are tears in his eyes. I kept my promise, he whispers. To all of you, I kept it. The temple hums around him, ancient and eternal, and for the first time in 10,000 years, a true king sits at its heart. The age of monarchs is over. The age of hope has begun. The centuries pass like whispers. Ren watches from his throne as the world below transforms. Kingdoms rise and fall, empires bloom and wither, mortals live and die in an endless cycle that he has come to understand as the natural order of things. He intervenes rarely now, only when the threads show him a darkness that might grow into something like the monarchs again. A touch here, a whisper there, a gentle nudge toward a better path. The Kinkeler hangs on the wall behind his throne, a reminder of what was lost and what was won. Its crystal head still holds the light of dying kings, but it has not been used since the Queen of Whispers fell. Ren hopes it never will be used again, but hope, he has learned, is not always enough. It happens in the 5th century of his reign. A mortal wizard, brilliant and ambitious, discovers something he should not have. The remnants of monarch power, scattered across the mortal realm after their deaths, have not fully dissipated. They linger in hidden places, waiting for someone with the knowledge and will to gather them. The wizard's name is Varen, and he believes he is saving the world. We were weak, he tells his followers, his voice burning with conviction. The monarchs ruled us for 10,000 years, and we could do nothing because we had no power of our own. The Thronebreaker gave us freedom but not strength. I will give us both. He collects the remnants. He performs rituals that should not be performed. He binds the scattered essence of dead monarchs to his own mortal soul, becoming something that has not existed since the first uprising. A new monarch, born not from theft but from ambition. Ren feels the moment it happens. The threads scream, twisting in ways they have not twisted for 500 years. A new darkness blooms in the mortal realm, and it is growing. He rises from his throne, takes the Kinkeler from the wall, and steps through the space between worlds. Varen's fortress rises from the ashes of a once great city. Ren remembers this place, remembers freeing it from a monarch's grip. Now it burns again, its people scattered, its hope extinguished. He walks through the gates, and the new monarch's servants flee before him. They sense what he carries, what he is, and they know they cannot stand against it. Varen waits in the great hall, seated on a throne built from the bones of his victim. He is young, perhaps 30 years, but his eyes hold the weight of stolen century. When he sees Ren, he smiles. The Thronebreaker, I wondered when you would come. Ren stops in the center of the hall, the Kinkeler in his hand. You don't know what you've done. You can't understand the power you've bound to yourself. I understand perfectly. Varen rises, and the stolen power flows around him like a cloak. I understand that the monarchs ruled for 10,000 years because they had power and we had none. I understand that you killed them, but you left their power scattered, waiting to be claimed. I understand that you sit on your throne in the temple and watch while mortals suffer and die, doing nothing to help. You don't know what I do, Ren says quietly. You don't see the threads the way I do. You don't understand the balance that must be maintained. Then teach me. Varen spreads his arms. Take me to your temple. Show me the threads. Let me help you maintain this balance you speak of. Together, we could do so much more than you can alone. Ren looks at the young wizard, at the ambition burning in his eyes, at the stolen power corrupting his soul, and he sees something else, something that makes his heart ache. Himself, 500 years ago, a gravekeeper who never asked for divinity but took it anyway because there was no other choice. I can't, Ren says. The power you've taken, it's changing you. Even now it's whispering to you, promising things it can never deliver. In a year you won't be Varen anymore. You'll be something else. Something that will have to be stopped. Then stop me now. Varen's voice hardened. If you're so certain of what I'll become, stop me before I become it. Kill me here in this hall and prove that you're no different from the monarchs you destroyed. Ren is silent for a long moment. The kinkler hums in his hand, eager to fulfill its purpose. It would be so easy. One strike and the threat ends before it truly begins. But that is not who he is. That has never been who he is. No, he says. I won't kill you for what you might become, but I won't let you destroy everything I fought for either. He raises his free hand and reaches for the threads. Varen's stolen power, bound so recently, is not yet fully integrated. It still carries the echoes of its original owners, the monarchs Ren killed centuries ago. And those echoes, those remnants, still remember the kinkler, still fear it. Ren touches the threads that bind the power to Varen's soul, and he pulls. Varen screams, the stolen essence tears free, ripped from his body by forces he cannot comprehend. It swirls in the air above him, a maelstrom of divine fury, and then it scatters, fleeing back to the hidden places where it waited for so long. Varen falls to his knees, mortal again, human again, his eyes wide with shock and loss. You took it, he whispers. You took everything. I freed you. Ren lowers his hand. The power was destroying you. In time, it would have consumed everything you were. I've given you a chance to be something else. What? Varen laughs bitterly. What can I be now? I'm nothing. Less than nothing. A wizard who reached for kinghood and failed. You can be a man. You can live a mortal life, love mortal loves, die a mortal death. You can be free in a way the monarchs never were. Ren turns away, walking toward the exit. That's what I fought for. That's what they all died for. Not to replace the monarchs with another king. To give mortals the chance to choose their own fates. He pauses at the door. The city outside needs help. Its people need a leader, someone to guide them as they rebuild. You have the skills, the knowledge, the ambition. Use them for something good. Prove that you're more than the power you tried to claim. He steps through the door and does not look back. Varen watches him go, and something shifts in his eyes. Ambition remains, but it is tempered now, directed. He looks at the ruins of the hall, at the bones of his victims, at the ashes of his dreams. Then he stands, walks outside, and begins to help. Ren returns to the temple and hangs the kinkler on its wall. The threads are calm again, the new darkness dispersed. But he knows it will not be the last. As long as mortals dream, as long as ambition burns, as long as power waits to be claimed, there will always be those who reach too far. His role is not to stop them. It is to be there when they fall, to offer a hand, to remind them of what truly matters. Another 1,000 years pass. Ren watches the world change in ways he could never have imagined. Mortals build cities that touch the sky. They sail across oceans, fly through clouds, reach for the stars. They forget the monarchs, forget the age of fear, forget even the thronebreaker who freed them. But some remember. Stories are told, passed down through generations, evolving into myths and legends. The gravekeeper who became a king, the thief who sat on an empty throne, the weapon that killed the unkillable. Ren hears these stories sometimes when he walks among mortals in disguise. He smiles at the inaccuracies, the exaggerations, the touches of wonder that time adds to all tale, but he never corrects them. Let them believe what they will. The truth is simpler and stranger than any story could capture. One day a child finds him. She is perhaps 7 years old, with bright eyes and messy hair, and a determination that reminds him of someone he knew long ago. She has wandered away from her village, into the forest where Ren sits by a stream, and she is not afraid. "Are you a king?" she asks. Ren considers the question. "I'm not sure what I am anymore. What do you think?" The child studies him with the serious intensity of the young. "My grandmother tells stories about a man who killed the bad kings. She says he had a spear that shone like the sun and eyes that could see everything. You don't have a spear, and your eyes look normal. Ren smiles. Maybe I left the spear at home, and maybe my eyes only look normal when I want them to. Oh, the child considers this. Can you see everything right now? Not everything, just enough. He reaches out and gently touches her forehead. You have a good heart, a brave heart. The world will need people like you someday. The child grins. I'm going to be a hero when I grow up, like the man in the stories. I'm going to help people and fight monsters and save everyone. Good. Ren stands, brushing dust from his clothes. That's a fine goal, but remember, the best heroes aren't the ones who fight the biggest monsters. They're the ones who help the people the monsters leave behind, the ones who rebuild, who heal, who hope. The child nods solemnly, though she does not fully understand. I'll try to remember. I know you will. Ren turns to go, then pauses. What's your name? Elena, what's yours? He looks back at her, at the bright eyes and messy hair and boundless hope, and he smiles. My name is Ren. I used to be a gravekeeper. He walks into the forest and vanishes, leaving the child staring after him with wonder in her eyes. That night she tells her grandmother about the strange man by the stream. The old woman listened, her face growing pale, her hands trembling. What did he look like? She asks. Describe him exactly. The child does her best. When she finishes, her grandmother is crying. Grandma, what's wrong? Nothing, child. Nothing is wrong. The old woman pulls her granddaughter close. You met someone very special today. Someone from the oldest stories. Someone I never thought I'd hear about except in tale. Was he really a king? He was something better. He was a man who became a king because he had to, and then spent eternity making sure no one ever had to do the same. The grandmother strokes the child's hair. Remember this day, Elena. Remember his name, and when you grow up, be the kind of person he would be proud of. The child nods, though she does not fully understand, but she remembers. Years later, when she becomes a healer, when she saves lives and mends broken bodies and brings hope to the hopeless, she remembers. And far away, in a temple that exists between worlds, Ren sits on his empty throne and watches the threads. He sees Elena grow, sees her become the woman her grandmother hoped she would be, sees her children and grandchildren and the generations that follow. He sees the world change, grow, flourish. He sees new challenges arise and new heroes meet them. He sees the cycle of life continue, endless and beautiful and terrible. And he is content. Are you happy? The temple asks him sometimes in its ancient voice. Ren considers the question each time, and each time his answer is the same. I'm at peace. That's better than happiness. He sits on his throne, the kinkeler on the wall behind him, the threads of fate spread before him. Outside, in the mortal realm, a child grows up to be a hero. A village rebuilds after a storm. A mother holds her newborn for the first time. The thief who stole divinity, who emptied thrones, who became a king despite himself, watches it all and smiles. This is what he fought for. This is what they all died for. This endless, beautiful, fragile thing called hope. The empty throne is filled at last. And Ren, the gravekeeper, finally rests. Elena's story becomes legend in its own right. She lives to be nearly 100, her healing hands mending countless bodies, her gentle spirit soothing countless souls. When she finally passes, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the entire continent mourns. They build a statue in her honor, in the square of the village where she met a king by a stream. Ren watches her funeral from the temple, and for the first time in centuries he feels something close to grief. Not for Elena, she lived a full life, a good life, exactly the kind of life he fought for, but for the reminder of what he has lost. Mortality, the ability to grow old, to pass on, to become a memory instead of a constant presence. You could let go, the temple whispers. You could lay down the burden. The world does not need you as it once did. Perhaps not, Ren agrees. But I'm not ready, not yet. He watches the centuries roll on. Empires rise and fall. Technologies advance and sometimes regress. Mortals spread across the continent, then across the ocean, then across the world. They discover magic in new ways, develop it, regulate it, sometimes abuse it. They create wonders and horrors in equal measure. And always, always, there are those who reach for power they should not have. Ren intervenes when he must, gently when he can. A whisper in a ruler's ear, a dream sent to a troubled soul, a mysterious stranger who appears at exactly the right moment to offer exactly the right advice. The Kinkeler has not left its place on the wall in thousands of years, but its presence is enough. A reminder, a promise. The world forgets the monarchs. They become myths, then legends, then stories that only scholars remember. The age of fear fades into history, replaced by an age of possibility. But some things never change. It happens in the 3000th year of Ren's reign. A young woman named Sira, brilliant and restless, discovers something buried deep beneath a mountain, a remnant of the old world, preserved by accident or design, a piece of a monarch that somehow survived the Kinkeler's touch. It calls to her, whispers to her, promises her everything. Sira is stronger than Varen was. She resists for months, studying the remnant, trying to understand it without being consumed by it. But the remnant is patient, and it knows that mortals are weak. Eventually, inevitably, she gives in. The power flows into her and she becomes something new. Not a monarch, the remnant is too small for that, but something close. A demi-king, a creature of borrowed divinity with all the ambition and none of the experience. Ren feels it immediately. The threads scream just as they did with Varen, but differently. This power is older, more cunning. It has learned from the mistakes of its predecessors. He takes the Kinkeler from the wall and steps into the mortal realm. Sira has established herself in a floating city, a marvel of magic and engineering that hovers above the clouds. She rules there, beloved by her people, using her power to protect and provide. When Ren arrives, she greets him not as an enemy but as an honored guest. "Thronebreaker," she says, bowing slightly, "I wondered when you would come." Ren studies her, this young woman who carries the weight of ancient power. She is not like Varen. There is no cruelty in her eyes, no ambition burning out of control. She rules with wisdom and compassion, and her people genuinely love her. "You know what you carry," he says. "You know where it came from." "I know." Sira meets his gaze steadily. "I know that this power once belonged to a monster. I know that it whispers to me, trying to corrupt me, trying to make me like its original owner. But I also know that I am stronger than it, that I can use it for good, not evil." Everyone who took this power believed the same. Everyone who took this power was alone. Sira steps closer, and there is something in her eyes that Ren has not seen in a very long time. Recognition, understanding. "You weren't alone. You had Ethel. You had Kale and Lyra and all the others who believed. I have no one. The remnant isolated, cut me off from everyone I loved because it knew that connection was my greatest strength." Ren is silent for a long moment. The Kinkeler hums in his hand, sensing his uncertainty. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need help." Sira's voice cracks just slightly. "I can feel it changing me day by day. Soon I won't be me anymore. I'll be something else, something that will have to be stopped. And I don't want that. I don't want to become a monster." She falls to her knees before him, tears streaming down her face. "Please, help me fight it, help me stay myself." Ren looks at her, at this young woman who reached for power and found herself drowning in it. He sees himself, 5,000 years ago, standing in a crater with a king's essence burning in his soul. He sees the fear in her eyes, the desperation, the desperate hope that someone, anyone, can save her. He remembers what it felt like. He remembers Kale's voice, rough and kind, offering to teach a stranger. He remembers Lyra's sharp eyes, watching his back when he couldn't watch it himself. He remembers Ethel's presence, warm and ancient, guiding him through the darkness. He kneels beside her. "I can help," he says, "but it won't be easy. It won't be quick, and you will have to fight every day for the rest of your very long life. Can you do that?" Sira looks up at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "I can try. That's all any of us can do." He helps her stand, and together they begin the long work of redemption. The years that follow are some of the hardest of Ren's existence. He teaches Sira as Kale taught him, pushing her to her limits, forcing her to confront the darkness within. The remnant fights back, whispering, tempting, trying to reclaim its hold. There are days when Sira nearly loses herself, when her eyes go dark and her voice changes, when Ren has to physically restrain her from doing terrible things. But she fights. Every day she fights. And slowly, gradually, she begins to win. The remnant does not die. It cannot die, not while Sira lives, but it weakens. Its whispers grow fainter. Its temptations lose their power. Sira learns to use its strength without being consumed by it, to channel its ancient power into new purposes. After a century of struggle, she is free. Not completely. The remnant will always be part of her, always a danger, but free enough. Free to live, to love, to be herself. She returns to her floating city and her people welcome her with joy. They had thought her lost, consumed by the power she carried. Instead, she returns stronger than ever and wiser and more compassionate. Ren watches from the crowd, hidden by his power, and feels something he has not felt in millennia. Pride. Sira finds him afterward in a quiet garden at the city's edge. She is different now, her eyes holding depths that were not there before, but she is still herself, still the brilliant young woman who fell to her knees and begged for help. "Thank you," she says simply. "I owe you everything. You owe me nothing. You did the work, I just pointed the way." "That's not true, and you know it." She sits beside him on a stone bench looking out over the clouds. "I used to wonder when I was a child what you were like, the throne breaker, the king who killed the monarchs. I imagined someone stern and powerful, someone distant and unapproachable. And now," she smiles, "now I know you're just a man who got dealt a terrible hand and played it as well as he could, like the rest of us." Ren laughs, a sound he has not made in centuries. "That might be the kindest thing anyone has ever said about me." They sit in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the clouds. The city hums around them, full of life and hope, and all the things Ren fought for so long ago. "What will you do now?" Sira asks eventually. "Go back to your temple, watch the rest of us struggle from a distance?" "I don't know." Ren considers the question. "For a long time I thought my purpose was to guard, to watch, to intervene when necessary and stay hidden the rest of the time. But lately, he looks at her, at this young woman who became a daughter to him in ways he never expected. "Lately, I've wondered if there might be another way, if maybe the best way to protect the world isn't to watch from a distance, but to be part of it, to live among mortals, to share their struggles, to remind them that they're not alone." Sira's eyes light up. "That's beautiful. That's exactly what the world needs." "Is it?" Ren smiles ruefully. "I'm not sure the world needs an ancient king wandering around, getting in the way. The world needs hope," Sira says firmly. "It needs reminders that goodness exists, that kindness matters, that even the darkest times can lead to light. And you, Ren the gravekeeper, are the best reminder of all." He is silent for a long moment, processing her words. Then he stands, offering her his hand. "Then let's go for a walk. Together. Let's see what the world looks like from ground level." Sira takes his hand, and they walk out of the garden, out of the floating city, down into the mortal realm below. The years that follow are the happiest of Ren's existence. He travels with Sira, watching her rule her city with wisdom and compassion. He meets her children and her children's children, and watches the family grow across generations. He becomes a legend in his own right, not as the distant throne breaker, but as a mysterious wanderer who appears when needed and disappears when his work is done. Sometimes he uses his power. More often, he doesn't. He discovers that a kind word, a helping hand, a moment of genuine connection can be more powerful than any divine intervention. He visits Lyra's grave and Kale's and all the others who fell in the war. He tells them about the world they helped create, about the freedom they bought with their lives. He thanks them, one by one, and promises to carry their memory forever. He visits the forgotten altar, the place where it all began. The hill is different now, covered in wildflowers and visited by pilgrims who have heard the stories. A small shrine has been built there, dedicated to the gravekeeper who remembered. Ren smiles, leaves a single wildflower at the base of the shrine, and walks away without being recognized. One day, thousands of years after he first sat on the empty throne, Ren returns to the first temple. He is tired now in ways that go beyond physical exhaustion. The weight of millennia presses on him, not painfully but persistently. He has lived so long, seen so much, lost so many. The threads still spread before him, countless futures waiting to unfold, but he finds himself less interested in them than he once was. "You have done well," the temple speaks, "better than any of us hoped." "I tried," Ren says simply. "That's all any of us can do." He walks to the throne, but he does not sit. Instead, he stands before it, looking at the kinkeler on the wall behind it. The weapon has not been used in millennia. It gathers dust, peaceful and forgotten. "I think it's time," he says quietly. "Time for what? Time to let go. Time to trust that the world doesn't need me anymore. Time to become what I always was deep down." "And what is that?" Ren smiles. "A gravekeeper, someone who tends the past so that the future can grow." He reaches out and touches the throne. Power flows from him into it, the accumulated divinity of 5,000 years, returning to the source that gave it to him. He feels himself diminishing, becoming smaller, more mortal. It should be terrifying, but instead it feels like coming home. When the transfer is complete, Ren stands before the throne as what he always was. A man, mortal, free. He walks out of the temple, through the space between worlds, and steps into the mortal realm for the last time. The sun is warm on his face. The wind carries the scent of wildflowers. In the distance, a village bustles with life, full of people who have no idea that a king just walked among them. Ren walks toward the village, an old man with tired eyes and gentle hands. He does not know how long he has left, days, weeks, maybe years. But he knows how he wants to spend them, helping, teaching, loving, living. He reaches the village and finds a small cottage at its edge, empty and waiting. He settles there, becoming just another face in the community, another elder with stories to tell and wisdom to share. The children love him. They gather at his feet and beg for tales of the old days, of heroes and monsters and kings who walked the earth. He tells them stories, some true and some not, always ending with the same lesson. The best heroes aren't the ones with the most power, he tells them. They're the ones with the most love in their hearts. Remember that. Years pass. Ren grows older, frailer, more mortal with each passing day. His hair turns white, his hands grow shaky, his steps become slow. But his eyes remain bright and his smile remains warm. On his last day, he lies in his bed, surrounded by the villagers who have become his family. Children weep. Adults hold back tears. An old woman, the village elder, holds his hand. "Any last words?" she asks gently. Ren smiles, thinking of all the threads, all the battles, all the loves and losses of 5,000 years. He thinks of Ethel, who gave everything for him, of Kale, who taught him to fight, of Lyra, who believed in him, of Sira, who became his daughter, of all the countless souls who made his long existence meaningful. "Tell them," he whispers, "that the gravekeeper remembered. Tell them that the thief kept his promise. Tell them that hope is real." He closes his eyes, and Ren, the gravekeeper who became a king, passes into memory. They bury him on the hill where it all began, beside the forgotten altar that no longer exists. The pilgrims who visit the shrine find a new grave there, simple and unmarked, covered in wildflowers. They do not know who lies beneath. They only know that the spot feels peaceful, feels holy, feels like a place where something important happened long ago. The centuries pass. The grave becomes legend, then myth, then a story that grandmothers tell their grandchildren. But somewhere in a temple between worlds, an empty throne waits. And on a hill covered in wildflowers, a gravekeeper rests at last.